Hello, everyone, and welcome to The Pod and the Pendulum. It's the show that covers horror movie franchises, one movie and one episode at a time. As always, I'm your host, Mike Snoonian, and just when we thought it was safe to go back in the water, we've got another killer shark out here waiting to turn us into chum. But I would not have any better first mates than my co-hosts that are with me today. Back in the co-host chair this week from the Losers Club, Halloweenies, and Girls on the Boys. Welcome back, Rachel Reeves. Rachel, how are we?
Oh my gosh, I am so good. I think the last episode I was on was, movie episode was Hell House 2 LLC. And, just in case anybody was curious, this is a much better movie than that. So I'm ecstatic to be here.
Are we only having you on for part twos now? Is that something that's going to be what we're going to be doing going forward? Is that just some sort of kismet that we've done?
It's probably part of some weird undiagnosed thing. I like to group things unintentionally. And I'm like, oh yeah, 2, that sounds good. I'm going to sign up for that one.
Also with us today, I think it's been a little bit, Brian. So
it has.
I think we've hit a bunch of movies where you're like, no, we're just not.
Well,
doing this.
Some maybe a little, but also it's just been a crazy second half of the year. So,
well, you know those pipes. He is from Bloody Disgusting. He is the co-host of the Movies for Life podcast, which just had a fantastic discussion of Jaws and arachnophobia on an episode. So go out and seek that out after you listen to this. Brian Kuiper is back. Brian, how are we?
Doing pretty good. School's out. I am ready to talk about swimming with sharks.
Excellent. Not the movie Swimming with Sharks with Frank Whaley and Kevin Spacey.
I am so confused now.
Which is really good. It's a really good movie. I recommend it, even though Kevin Spacey's in it. Frank Whaley's great in it. We have a guest this week as well. We have someone who, I won't spoil his feelings on the movie here, but he is one half of the Horror Queers podcast, part of the Bloody Disgusting network. And I think the first time he's been on this show?
I was looking at this. I had to Google my name plus Pod and the Pendulum. So it has been over 2 years because we discussed Final Destination 5 in 2021.
Okay, that's right. It's hard to keep track.
Yeah, sure.
That's right. Back when Lindsay was in the co-host chair as well.
Also, I'm sorry. I have to say, Hell House LLC 2, while definitely having some atrocious acting, I think it's a worse film than the first movie because I love that first movie, but I think it has better scares than the first movie does.
Wow.
Yeah, there's some in there for sure, but I think we can all agree this is better.
Oh yeah, no, Jaws 2 is amazing. With Final Destination 5, I will always come and defend sequels because I'm a sequel person. I love originals. I get it. But there's something where I just like where we have all the character introductions out of the way, and we can just pick up with these characters in a new setting where it's okay, cool, they've experienced this, let's go. That's why Scream 2 is my favorite Scream.
This is just a sampling of the hot takes that our guest today, who I haven't even named.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I think you know the voice. That's all right. Trace Thurman, welcome back to the show.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here and discussing again one of my favorite sequels of all time, Jaws 2.
So let's start with that then. Before we kind of dive into the background of this movie, let's talk about our initial impressions, when we first saw the movie. Has our opinion changed over the years? And Trace, as our guest, why don't you kind of continue that thought?
Yeah, I'll clarify too. I actually do think Jaws is a better movie than Jaws 2, but if I'm going to put one on just to watch, I will always put on Jaws 2. This is the first Jaws movie I ever saw. I was probably around 5 years old, and I was visiting my grandmother, and my uncle was there, and it was late at night, and he puts on TNT or something, and Jaws 2 is playing, and it's on the skier scene, and he's telling me about it and stuff, and at this point I've never heard of Jaws before, and good lord, when Marge gets swallowed whole by this fucking shark, you better believe that I was traumatized by this. To the point where I have this vivid memory of 10 years later, I'm a teenager in high school, and I have a dream that I also get swallowed by a shark, and when I'm in the shark's stomach, Marge's corpse is in there, but she's still alive and talking to me.
Oh my god.
That's amazing.
So there's a lot of trauma with me in this movie.
Yeah. What would make you, if you don't mind me asking, and I can get that, where you can understand, we're like, all right, this is the better movie. I get from like a technical standpoint, like this movie is technically better, but I want to go to watch this one. What makes this one more of a rewatchable movie for you?
Honestly, I think it's the third act. And look, the third act of Jaws is amazing, but the thing is, it's just such like straight bro male energy with these three guys on a boat going fishing. I like the slasheriness of the third act of Jaws 2, and I know it's kind of old hat to say that by this point because everyone is like, oh yeah, Jaws 2 is a slasher film, but I just think it makes it more exciting to watch the shark go after all these kids, even if he really only eats like one of them, two of them.
Two. Excellent. Brian, how about yourself?
Well, this is one of those things. I watched these in reverse order from what was available at the time. So I watched 3 first.
Wow.
We rented Jaws 3 for some reason, and when we first got a VCR, and it kind of freaked me out. You were talking about the dream of being swallowed by a shark and everything. There's a part, in that movie where the guy's like stuck in the gullet of the shark.
Best scene of the movie, by the way.
Yeah, it's the only thing I remember about it, frankly. And that was my nightmare. I had that same dream, so I understand that fully. But then instead of going back to seeing 1, I decided, well, I guess we'll just watch 2 next. I don't know why. I think my dad had said, oh, Jaws 2 is great because this guy gets eaten out of a helicopter, which just puts something in my brain of the shark jumping into the air and eating a helicopter guy out of a helicopter. Anyway, so I saw that Jaws 2, which the corpse flying out of the water, I vividly remembered that. And then I finally saw 1. And so 1 was my favorite. I think I still have the VHS tape that my grandma gave me when I was, I want to say I must have been in 6th grade when I got this, and it's still in great shape, which is amazing because I watched it a whole lot. But 2 was always like, I liked it. I thought it was good, and I had a good time with it. And as I've watched it over the years later, it's like, okay, there's some things I really, really like about this movie, and I still find it really entertaining. For me, Jaws, though, is a perfect movie. The more I see it, the more I'm convinced of that fact. And so I can't think of a better shark movie. But I got to say, Jaws 2 is probably, for all its faults, probably the 2 or 3 of the best shark movies, in my opinion. So, yeah. Which, just tells you what shark movies qualities are in general. But,
I mean, it's like Jaws and Deep Blue Sea. Those are the 2.
Yeah. I like The Shallows. I like Open
The Shallows,
Water.
Yeah.
It's good.
Yeah,
I do like The Reef.
I haven't seen
I think it's pretty divisive because it's one of those ones where it's like, oh, they're filming with like real shark footage, but it's like superimposed. I like it, but I can see why someone wouldn't.
Yeah.
So Brian, you haven't mentioned. You said, "Well, I think Jaws is my favorite," but I noticed you didn't mention Jaws: The Revenge. So do you think after you watch that movie, it might supersede Jaws as your favorite?
No, definitely not.
I
saw Jaws: The Revenge right when it came out, and I actually kind of loved it at the time, but I was only, 9.
That's I went back and rewatched all these a couple years ago, and I watched Jaws: The Revenge a lot as a kid, and it's the thing with Jaws: The Revenge is it's boring. Like it is bad, but it's also boring, which is kind of the unforgivable part of it.
The only thing I remembered about it when I went back and watched, because I watched it, maybe a year, maybe 2 ago, and was the part where Sean gets his arms bitten off, which is just like the most ridiculous thing. Well, that freaked me out as a kid, but now I see it and it's like, wow, that is really crazy. And then it follows them, which is wild. Yeah. And Michael Caine, coming out of the sea, and all of a sudden his shirt's dry, and it's amazing. And the roaring shark. I don't know. The shark roaring like a dragon. I mean, there's bold choices in Jaws: The Revenge.
It takes some swings. Rachel, how about yourself?
So I put off watching not just this one, all of them for like an embarrassingly long time because I've had some trauma surrounding Jaws as a child. What's funny is because my dad would sing the theme song, and he would, playing around, being a cute dad, da dun da, and would come after me, and it would be like, he was like, Jaws is gonna get you, and I'd never seen Jaws, but like this tune and him like talking about Jaws became like a trigger for me and my whole family. It's, I love my family but families can be jerks sometimes too, like teasing you. And so whenever they would just like to get under my skin, they'll like sing the Jaws theme song. And so I never actually saw them till I saw the original Jaws when I was like a teenager, and then finally just watched all of the sequels like last year because I was like, I just got to get this out of the way. Like, what am I doing?
You're doing exposure therapy to get over the trauma your dad caused.
Yeah, and it's like I'm not actually scared of sharks, but I say that, but I don't know if I go swimming in the ocean, I might feel differently. But it's just funny how that sort of made me never want to watch them, just my family being silly family and doing that forever. But when I finally did see this one, I was actually super impressed, like just how well it kind of continued the Brody story and that there were so many of the original cast members that returned. I wasn't necessarily expecting that, and I just kind of expected garbage, but I felt like I was like, oh, I got something decent here, which was great. And then I watched Jaws 3 and was like, okay, well, here we go.
That's the thing. Jaws 3, it's like, Jaws at SeaWorld should also be a lot more fun than that movie is.
Correct.
Yeah.
I'm convinced SeaWorld was like, okay, you can do this, but like nobody can die, guys.
Yeah.
Especially with that cast. You get
Dennis Quaid!
Jennifer Jason Leigh, Lou Gossett Jr. coming off an Oscar for An Officer and a Gentleman, and this is what you get. Like, that is and Joe Alves, who had done production design and a lot of the shooting for the first two Jaws, and this is what directs that, and this is what you get. And we'll talk about Jaws 3D more next week. That should be a really fun discussion as well, and what we could have gotten as well with Jaws 3. We'll talk about that, and one of the great like could have been
Jaws 3 People Zero.
Would have been amazing, written by John Hughes,
Joe Dante, and
but so for me, this like similar to Trace, like I watched this movie a ton as a kid. Like I remember being like probably 4 or 5 years old. Well, I had to be at least 5 years old at this point, and it being on TV all the time, like it being one of like ABC Network Movie of the Week. It was either Jaws or Jaws 2 pretty much every other week, and then early cable television would show Jaws 2 all of the time. I mentioned this when we talked about Jaws, like the first two movies for the longest time, like blurred for me, like just all of them seemed, I would just mix up parts of the two. I think what stood out was the end of this movie with the shark getting electrocuted. And I remember having like Jaws 2, like trading cards as well growing up, having stuff like that. And obviously the poster standing out. I didn't watch this movie again probably until about 2 years ago. We were staying on the Cape, and every year on the 4th of July we throw on Jaws, and I decided I'm just gonna watch all of these movies. Like I hadn't seen 3 since I was a kid, had never watched Jaws the Revenge, and I put on Jaws 2 and was a bit disappointed with that watch of it, going, and it's hard. I think I need like some space in between watching Jaws and Jaws 2. Like you need a little bit of a gap. It's hard to watch them back to back. It's kind of the Rocky 2 of the series, in that it's really good, but it just does a lot of what the first one does, not quite as well. So you need a little bit of space between them. The biggest difference between Rocky 2 and Jaws 2, obviously, is the shark doesn't win at the end, unlike Rocky, which would have been kind of amazing. Researching this episode, and we'll talk about this in a second, how difficult this movie was to make. Like, there was a lot of behind-the-scenes drama. The fact that it's as good as it is kind of a miracle. And rewatching it for the show, I really enjoyed especially rewatching it last night, like it all just kind of clicked. Like the kids are the first time I actually really like the teenagers in this, even though I probably couldn't name most of them. I just gave most of them nicknames, which we'll kind of discuss here in a little bit. But let's talk about the background of this. Let's talk about how this movie got made and some of the difficulties with it. I mean, it seems like a foregone conclusion, like Jaws is the biggest movie of all time upon its release. It seems like a foregone conclusion. They're going to follow it up, though. This is a time when sequels aren't necessarily the norm. You basically have the Planet of the Apes movies. You have The Godfather 2. And I'm trying to think what other... The French Connection 2 and The Exorcist 2, but those are not very well regarded in terms of movies. God, when we get to The Heretic in next year at some point, that should be a fun discussion. We might have to drink a lot during that.
That's one of those ones, too, where like I watched it and I was like, this isn't good. And like a couple years ago, I tried to watch it again and be like, you know what? I appreciate camp now because I'm mature and old, so maybe I'll like this movie. No, it's also bad and boring.
And they gave it like a special edition 4K, all these like bonus features.
Right.
You think like maybe there's something here, and it's like nope, still not there, still not good. Not every movie
it's
needs
a sophomore
4K
slump,
release.
right? Like it's hard when something is so good, and then you're just over analyzing every decision to the point where it actually just makes it worse.
Well, and that too, like I mean, I know we're not talking Extras 2, but like that's like the director of fucking Deliverance doing that movie. So like the pedigree of that movie is all there, and you're just watching it like, what happened?
Yeah.
I was listening to the Movies That Made Me podcast, and William Friedkin was on, and he said he saw 40 minutes of The Exorcist 2 and declared it to be the worst movie ever made.
All right.
So
I think you got to make it to those end credits to say that. You got it because
the thing is though, he if anyone's earned the right
Sure.
to say it, it's probably William Friedkin.
I could see
It's
Friedkin like waving around his gun from the set of The Exorcist and shooting it
Right.
off while watching this movie, just shooting it at the screen. All right. So
anyway,
David Zanuck and Robert Brown, or did I get that incorrect? Is it David Zanuck or Robert? Anyway, Zanuck and Brown, the producers of the original Jaws, they are approached to produce Jaws 2, and they reluctantly agree. They're kind of like, we don't really have any ideas for it, but if we don't do it, somebody else will. And they did feel a bit protective of it. And I'm sure also kind of realized there's a pretty good paycheck in them for as well with Jaws 2. Like, they're not going to lose any money producing Jaws 2. Spielberg is approached to come back to the directing chair for Jaws 2. Would anyone care to read the quotes I've put in here from Spielberg from the notes? If not, it's okay. Rachel, give me your best Spielberg. This is from the interview with the New York Times. In an interview with the Times, what does he say about directing sequels?
Yeah, I'm not interested in sequels in general, and the Jaws sequel specifically. The original idea was an important one, but it was once and only shot. Why not make 4 new movies rather than, rehashing an old one?
That was an excellent impression of Spielberg, like he was here with
also,
us.
I resent the fact that sequels are not new movies.
Well,
Yeah.
He's mostly true to his word, right? I mean, aside from
Indiana Jones.
The Lost World, yeah.
Indiana Jones and The Lost World, yeah.
I kind of see Indiana Jones less as sequels and more as like serial adventures.
Yeah.
Too, where The Lost World.
Yes,
and I
I
see
know.
your face, Trace. I see that face.
I mean, I could agree with that with maybe Temple of Doom. I don't even think Last Crusade, because Temple of Doom's a prequel, but like King of the Crystal Skull and Dial of Destiny are directly paying off plot beats from the previous film.
Okay.
So
I guess it would have been hard to make a sequel to Lincoln as well. Like, that would have been a hard one to make a sequel to. So,
Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter.
yeah.
Or
Oh,
Abraham Lincoln Vampire.
that could have been good.
That would be the only way to bring him back, I guess. Yeah.
For the most part, considering everything he's made, he does kind of try to move on. And at the San Francisco Film Fest, he tells the audience sequels are little more than a cheap carny trick, which is
That's
wow,
like,
that's-
Fuck you, Spielberg.
I don't agree with that. Yeah, like,
Well, he was at the age of hubris here. He was about to make 1941 and
Sure.
whoops.
get taken down a peg.
No. He's saying it at the time too, where sequels are definitely not the norm like they are now. Like now movies don't get made unless there's at least a trilogy in them. I mean, it's like if we can't make 3 of them, then we're not going to make a single one at all. So I kind of admire that. And really what it boils down to, like Spielberg at one point, like when we talk about the first director who's removed, he actually did take like a week to consider how he would do Jaws 2. He actually did give it some consideration as a kind of just like, well, maybe I owe it to like Zanuck, Brown, and Scheinberg because they did help really make my career. And he sat down for a week and he just couldn't, aside from maybe doing like the one of the ideas we'll talk about, he couldn't come up with something that he felt worthy of following up the first movie. And then the thought of going back out and shooting on the water for months, he just couldn't see it. Just filled him with panic and dread. He's like, I'm not going through that.
Well, that's the thing too. Like that story, which I think is a really cool concept, is you're on the. It's basically a boat movie. Like you're just on the water the whole time. But do y'all remember that we did get a movie about that with Nicolas Cage a few years ago?
Yep. No, I do not.
Oh, we sure did.
Yeah. I never saw it, but I heard about it.
Does Nick Cage play the shark?
No, so it's in
like
2016, and it's called USS Indianapolis: Men of Courage, and it's got Thomas Jane and Jaws: The Revenge's Mario Van Peebles, but by all accounts, it is atrocious.
There's a made-for-TV version of it too that's out there. I can't recall the name of it, but it was like a TV movie of the week as well for that. It really boils down to Spielberg not wanting to go back out on the water again, like which you can't really blame him for after all the difficulties making that first movie. That'd be a tough road up. Howard Sackler comes back to write the script. He had written a rough draft of the first Jaws uncredited. He pitches the idea of doing the USS Indianapolis story for a second movie. It's rejected for being a bit too dark.
Oh, it's so dark. That's because it's like, well, that's true.
I know,
like,
it's like a
it
true
happened,
story.
and it's military personnel, like which is sensitive for a lot of people. So yeah, that doesn't surprise me that got rejected at all.
Who would want to go out for that, right? Like Jaws 2, you're expecting a bit more of the same, and you get this historical drama. Like that would be a tough
But also, wouldn't you need to have Robert Shaw back in that film?
I don't think so, because it's 30 years prior. It's
right. Well, I'm sorry, but you would have the Robert Shaw character in the film.
Yes, you would have Quint in the film.
Yeah.
It would have to be. I'm sure you could like kind of bookend it with
the speech
footage from Jaws and the speech, and then I guess you would end it with him getting eaten by the shark and really send audiences home happy.
That would be kind of like interesting though, because like the shark would kind of win in the end, right?
Well, that's like no. So you open with the speech, and then you have the Indianapolis movie, and then it's like okay, so Shaw Quint's one of the survivors with however many other people, and he's like, all right, cool, I never want to see a shark again, and then you just immediately cut to him getting chomped by the shark.
Like, what is a positive way to end this movie? Like, there isn't one.
You could maybe even have some indication it's one of the same sharks from the
Sharks,
Indianapolis.
yeah, exactly.
I mean, to be fair though, these Jaws movies just end. Like the first movie ends with Brody and Hooper like on a fucking like plank of wood paddling back to shore.
Right.
I still don't believe they actually would have made it back to shore. Those fuckers would have like died from exposure or drowned.
Yeah.
They're not that far out.
I disagree.
That's the thing we forget.
Fair enough.
When you look at how far out they are, they're not like you can see. Like when you turn the other way, you can see the land. Like that was one of the difficulties in shooting, and that they didn't ever want to show the land, but it wasn't that far out.
But that means within the world of the film, they are meant to be further out than they actually are.
Well, by the end of the he did it more just to give that suggestion of like you don't want to show, like if you can see the land as an audience, you're going to be like, well, they're not that bad. You do exactly what we're saying right now. But if you watch the credits of Jaws all the way through, it ends with them like on shore. Like they've actually paddled all the way back during the credits.
I don't think I've ever actually watched Jaws all the way to the end of the credits.
Yeah.
Well, there we go.
And
you can't really see it unless you get the 4K. To be honest, it's pretty
they're like
dim.
little dots on the beach.
They're little, pretty much. I saw it in the theater in that 3D re-release, and I made my son watch it all the way through with me. He's like, you can see them; they're getting up.
Oh,
there
that's
they are.
funny.
So.
Yeah. And the other thing too is before phones, like people exercise and shit. Like people they worked out. So, like Brody for like being a chain smoker, like probably has better cardio fit. No, it definitely has better cardio fitness than me. Like half of my body is made of sausage. So, it's so anyway, Sackler goes back and rewrites a script based on what Sid Sheinberg says. He says audiences want like another adventure with the Brodies and a man-eating shark. I think the quote I read from Sheinberg is somewhere along the lines of like, if you have friends over and serve them fish and they love the fish, the next time they come over, you serve fish again. You don't serve like spaghetti. Like you want to give them more of what they actually want. Like that's his idea of sequels. So who do we get to film a follow-up to the highest-grossing movie of all time to that point? You get John Hancock, not the gentleman with the large signature on the Declaration of Independence. A lot of historical allusions in this pod so far today. He comes on after the success of his first two feature films, the psychological horror Let's Scare Jessica to Death, which is amazing, and Bang the Drums Slowly, which I've never seen, but I've heard great things, and I think it's the first like Robert De Niro like starring vehicle. Like he'd appeared in Mean Streets, I know, but I think Bang the Drum Slowly is his first real kind of starring showcase.
And I always thought this was really interesting because I was like, why are you going to get this guy who's done like some indie horror film like from 71 to do this? But then I think, well, Spielberg didn't have like a huge film au revoir before doing this. He did Duel and Sugarland Express, and then it was Jaws. So I was like, I guess it's not that far out of the realm, but you would think for a sequel to the biggest movie ever made, they would look for a director with a little bit more under his belt.
Yeah. We still do that now. Like we see these indie horror directors like come up and then they get, I know it took a lot longer, but look at like Sam Raimi who does like these Evil Dead movies and Darkman, and then he's doing Spider-Man. And it's kind of like, what? The guy that did the Evil Dead is going to do Spider-Man? And I know he had more under his belt, but I think you get these guys that can make small movies, and probably if you're a studio, you probably think you can exert a lot more control of these persons as well. Like it's like they're going to be kind of under your thumb a little bit. So
I also wonder if it has anything to do with it being a genre picture too. Just the fact that like maybe they're like, oh, it did really well, but like, meh. It's not like necessarily looked at the same way as if it were like some other kind of giant film that had a bit more quote unquote prestige.
I don't even disagree with you, but then that goes back into the whole conversation where it's like, is Jaws a horror film? Which it's a killer shark movie. Like it's a horror film. Like come on. Yes. But whatever. I digress.
I said this way back when Chapter 1 came out, and there was a lot of discourse from persons not in the horror community. Well, is it actually a horror movie? Elevated, and I'm like, it's opening scene,
supernatural,
exactly.
But honestly, though, like that's why I never like to have those debates about, is it like Jurassic Park? Is it horror? For me, yeah, it's about fucking killer dinosaurs.
Yep.
But that's why, honestly, I've kind of moved into the genre label. I'm like, it's a genre film. Yes. Like it covers all encompassing, like thriller, suspense, horror, whatever. They're all in the same sandbox.
Horror is a massive umbrella, probably more so than any other genre. Like horror allows you to sneak in so many other genres into it.
You just can't call it horror.
Yeah.
But, it's any movie that features like a 10-year-old boy getting eaten by a shark in front of his mother is a horror movie. I don't care if the rest of the movie features just circus clowns throwing pies at one another and getting hit with footballs in the balls.
I think that's why, though, it's like, because Jaws has such it is a character-driven film, and so I think that's what throws people off. Even with Jaws 2, I think Jaws 2 has not as much character work, but like it's there, and I think, especially at the time, critics, they're like, oh, well, horror films are like lowbrow, like they're just about the killing, so this can't be a horror film because it cares about its characters.
Yeah. You see that in these early horror movies. You see that when horror started to become something that wasn't just going to get dumped into drive-in theaters or exploitation theaters. Like you see, like John Carpenter with Halloween. Like he sets up half of the movie with his characters, with following Jamie Lee Curtis and PJ Souls and Nancy Loomis around. Like, you want to like these characters before horrible things happen to them. Even Texas Chainsaw Massacre, you spend like a good amount of time with all of those kids in the van, so you feel like you really know all of them before all of the mayhem starts and they're disposed of. And I think those are, to me, always the best horror movies.
Well, and that's actually really interesting that you bring up Texas Chainsaw, because I even remember both when I first saw Jaws and when I first saw Texas Chainsaw, I actually thought they were really boring. Because, again, I'm like, oh, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, like, it's about a bunch of people getting killed by chainsaws. And it takes a while for that to start happening. And same with Jaws. Like, there are really brutal kills in Jaws, but they're spaced out between this 2+ hour runtime.
Agree. And when I'm younger, I think I had the same reaction to Texas Chainsaw Massacre, because I remember my best friend's dad saying, oh, I went on a date with my, his now wife. Like, it was one of their first dates. And he said he ran out of the theater and threw up. And so I was so excited when I finally turned 18 to watch Texas Chainsaw. And I remember watching it with friends being like, this is it? Like, are you sure? Yeah. And now, to me, it's the perfect horror movie and probably the scariest movie of all time. It's amazing how, like, our tastes shift as we kind of get older a little bit. So.
Yeah.
Okay, so what does Hancock want to do with this movie? So Hancock and Sackler want to really explore the aftermath of Jaws. What would it be like if your town became Shark Town, and then the once thriving community of Amity, it becomes a ghost town? So in the original draft of this movie, all the stores are shuttered up. Like, most of the businesses have gone out of business. There's beachfront property standing completely empty with for sale signs on them. The town is basically in ruin. And Quint's son was going to turn up in the original script and claim he wants the $10,000 reward for killing the shark in his father's place. He's like, heck, my dad killed the shark or helped kill it. I am due that money as his heir. Hancock envisioned as the guy who filmed Let's Scare Jessica to Death, as you think he would want to do. It's a much darker, it's a much more psychological horror movie. If I remember correct, there are scenes in it where Brody is envisioning sharks everywhere. Like, he just basically is always seeing sharks every time he sees any body of water.
It's like the land shark, the SNL skit, where like somebody's at the door.
Right.
I was going to say, it's like Jurassic Park 3 when the raptor's like, Alan! Yeah. And we have the shark like, Brody!
Candygram.
Oh my god.
I will say, though, as much as I love the current iteration of Jaws 2, I would prefer to have that version of the movie, the original, darker, like, ghost town version, because I think it's more interesting.
Yeah.
It is. I would agree.
Yeah, I think so, too.
I would absolutely agree with that. It is a lot more violent. Like, is this one, although the body count is definitely higher in Jaws 2 than Jaws 1, I think the original script, it's double. There's a character named Bob, and they named him that as a joke because he's literally bitten in half, and his upper torso is like bobbing in the water.
Well, so Bob, okay, I'm sorry, I may be jumping ahead a little bit, but the girl that plays Jackie, everyone fucking hates her because she screams a lot. And there's a shot at the end of the movie where, it's when all the kids are kind of swimming towards Cable Junction, and it just cuts to Jackie, and she's like, ah, ah, ah. The reason for that is because Bob is a character who does die. He dies, and they removed his death from the film. So she's actually reacting to seeing Bob die. But in the final version of the film, we're like, what the fuck is she screaming at? Nothing's happening.
Right.
That doesn't do Jackie's... Because Jackie is one of the more annoying characters in this movie.
I will defend Jackie.
We'll get to that. We'll get to that. I could have done with 5 minutes less. And I think if that scene is in there, then you can understand her freaking out a bit more.
Yeah.
I thought I thought Bob was replaced by Eddie, so I did not know that about.
It's because Eddie and Bob, because is Eddie the character who's played by Christine Boy?
No, I think Eddie
No,
is like
it's
the...
not. That's not.
Sorry, Eddie is Tina's boyfriend. No. So there's a guy with a hat, and if you Google Bob Death Jaws 2, because the only thing that exists from this deleted scene is a still of Bob, like, on his boat, like, as it's sinking, and the shark's, like, charging towards him. That's the only thing you can find in this scene.
I will definitely look for that afterwards. You're right, Keith Gordon. Keith Gordon is one half of the Dungeons and Dragons.
Yes.
That's how I named it in my script. So, and he's great for the little that he's in here in this.
I love Keith Gordon.
Yeah, he's
I
hard.
just rewatched Christine lately, not that long ago. And
He's a little bit of an incel in this, but that's...
Well, he's also an incel in Christine.
Yes.
Oh, man, is there a reason why Keith Gordon was getting typecast in these roles?
It's just the way he looks.
I think it's, we're looking at these things differently now.
Yeah. So Hancock begins filming June of 1977 on Martha's Vineyard. This time around, like, the vineyard's mostly going to be used for exteriors and setup shots, where the bulk of the filming is actually going to take place around Pensacola, Florida. But they do want to do some of the exteriors on the vineyard to kind of give it that matching look for Jaws 1, which helps, I think. I think one of the things I'll say is you can tell when this movie shifts between Massachusetts and Florida. Like, I'm from here, so it's really obvious to me. But I think you can tell the hotel scene in particular. You're like, that doesn't look like any of the flora that you would ever see in New England. Right. Like, it's way too tropical.
Oh, I didn't catch that.
Yeah,
I was like,
okay.
I'm not from that area. So.
I can't say I've ever paid attention to the flora in my surrounding areas.
Okay. Well, like in Halloween when you see palm trees, you're like, wait a minute, there are no palm trees in Illinois, right?
Yeah, I guess that makes sense.
So that kind of thing.
I do that when I saw Megan, when I saw Insidious. I was like, this was not filmed in Seattle. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
There are no palm trees up
I was
here.
going to say, I think it's just what you're familiar with.
They shot those in Australia. So, yeah.
Okay. So, anyway, unfortunately, after about a month of filming and about 18 months spent on pre-production, Hancock is called into a meeting with Zanuck and Brown, and he's promptly fired. He and his wife, screenwriter Dorothy Tristan, immediately head to Rome to vacation, and production shuts down completely for over a month. So it was hard to pin down like a singular reason for Hancock's firing, but there's a number of stories out there. Like, it really depends on what you read. The number one thing that came up a few times was Dorothy Tristan. Basically, Hancock tells her, like, why don't you rewrite Sackler's script? Like, give this another pass over. But he doesn't consult Sackler before he does that, and he doesn't consult Universal Studios before that. So Sackler is insulted, like, wait, why are you writing my script without, like, a prompt from the studio telling you to do so? And that was considered a massive insult. Universal wasn't thrilled either. Less than a month into shooting, the schedule had already fallen way behind. In the press, Hancock is going to, like, rightly blame the mechanical shark, saying that just like in the first film, it's going to maybe work one out of every 3 shots and everyone's time is wasted. And the first Jaws went way over budget and way over time as well. The difference being Spielberg shot all of the stuff on land first, and he maybe lost 2 or 3 days altogether. It wasn't until they went onto the water that shooting fell far behind. So Universal, they're a month into shooting, and they're already way, way behind, and they're kind of freaking out at this point. Like, if they're already this far behind, what's going to happen down the road? So they're like, we can't let this balloon out of control. There's talk that Hancock, this being his first really, like, spectacle movie with a large cast, a large budget, and the heavy expectations of following up the number one movie of all time, like, he was showing strain on set from all the pressure. This one I really liked. Sheinberg was pushing Hancock to have Lorraine Gary have a much larger role in the climax of the movie. He wanted his wife, like, out there in the ocean with Brody more, and he wanted her more involved in the rescue of the kids. And Zanuck gets wind of that, and there's a power struggle between Sheinberg and Zanuck. Like, they are basically arguing over the profits of Jaws. Like, they're going back and forth over who gets what cut of the profits, so some things never change.
Yeah.
And Zanuck gets wind of this. He's like, he hits the roof. He's like, there's no fucking way this is going to happen.
Okay, so here's the thing, though. I actually think that's a big mistake, because one of my favorite parts of Jaws 2 actually is the marital relationship between Brody and his wife. Like, there's a part in the film where she's just like, want to fool around, and I'm like, that's such like a casual... I love that, because that is how a lot of couples, like, start having sex. And it always rubs me the wrong way when she just goes back with Tina. I'm like, bitch, this isn't your daughter. Like, your kid is out there.
Yeah, you know what else? Yeah, her little kid is out there. It also bothers me that she's wearing a skirt the whole time. And I feel like that's incredibly but that's a wardrobe issue.
70s sexism.
Yeah. She doesn't know that Sean's out there yet, though.
Well, she at least knows that Mike is out there.
That's true. That's true. Yeah, that's true. That's the thing that we only have one kid, so I don't know this for sure. But I think about if you have multiple kids, like if one of them, you lose one, you got.
Oh, you're fine.
But I think I just have to. Okay, so Brody goes out there, like he sees that Mike's hurt, and he's like, "You guys go back and go get help, right?" And then he was going to go save the rest of their friends. He should have put his younger son in the boat with the other son. Why would you leave this like 8-year-old kid if they're going back? Put the little kid in the boat. Or no, he wasn't there. I know teens. Okay, then I blame the teens. They should have known better.
No. Because they're all in the group because it's after Mike gets his concussion. And like, oh my god, we got to get Mike back to shore. And it's like, okay, there's enough room on that boat for this little 8-year-old. Get him out of here.
Remove him from the equation.
I think the fear was because they're all kind of like together in that clump, except for the boat that was getting I think they're scared, like, if we row over to him, the shark's going to pop up. And B, what if we just sail into him? I agree. Like, they should have gotten the little kid on the boat.
I mean, again, like, I love this movie, but no, it is, we need Sean in the water to make the stakes higher.
I was going to say, that girl who died would probably appreciate it if Sean had gone away.
And I'm sorry, like, I'm 34 now, or if I was fucking 17 years old, I would not be risking my life to save some 8-year-old that I don't fucking know.
I think when I was rewatching this with my wife, I was like, what I would do is like use Sean as bait.
Brutal.
Like, throw Sean in the water.
Classic
and then
Mike
as he's getting eaten, swim. Yeah. She agreed. I mean, my wife was like, yeah, that's a pretty smart move.
Also, that kid was a shithead. He was going to tell on Mike for, like, leaving. But nevertheless.
Dad, and he's like, yeah, what a...
But going back to the Lorraine Garyville, I would have liked to have seen the dynamic. Again, seeing Brody and his wife spend more time together.
Yeah.
And dealing with this, because Mrs. Brody missed all that shit in the first movie.
Yeah. She has the worst send-off in the first movie. Like, when you watch her run and her arms are kind of, like, flapping out, like, it's like, that's not a good...
She's like Cindy Campbell. I'm not crazy!
Let's save a little bit of the Martin and Ellen talk for the meat, because I do want to talk. I think that is one of the highlights of the movie. I do want to talk more about that, but I agree with a lot of what you're saying. I found an interview with... Hancock from the site lukeford.net, like way back in 2002. He talks about that tension between Sheinberg and Zanuck and getting caught up in it. He's like, basically says, I was fired on Jaws 2. I was Dick Zanuck's choice for it after he and Sidney Sheinberg still had scores to settle on the overages profit sharing on the first Jaws. Sheinberg had my wife and I over to dinner. She was writing the screenplay. Sheinberg made a strong case that his wife, Lorraine Gary, who played Roy Scheider's wife in the first Jaws, should go out on a boat in the second Jaws to rescue the kids. We went back and relayed this to Zanuck, he said, over my dead body. And then when he goes on, he's like, well, I have to pick a side here. He's like, well, Zanuck is just some lawyer producer. Like, he's not that important. And Scheider is one of the heads of Universal, so I'm going to go with what he says. And he's like, I chose poorly. He says once he started to shoot more stuff with Lorraine Gary, like, Zanuck ices him out at that point, like, wouldn't even talk to him. The other thing that's argued is, like, the footage, like, Hancock actually shoots looks like hot garbage. Like, it's like Verna Fields says it's out of focus. You can't see their heads. Like, he's shooting an art film. Like, what's going on here? Jonas Swark, who will direct this movie, who we'll talk about, he says, yep, I poured through all the footage to see, like, what can we actually use from this? Because it behooves him to be able to use some of it to make it easier. He's like, we could use about 8 seconds of footage of the movie. And I wasn't quite sure what 8 seconds it was. I think
I don't know. There's a scene where Brody's, like, walking up the steps into, I don't know if it's like the station or something, but the, like, up above the text is, like, very clearly out of focus. I wonder, it's like, well, I don't think that was a choice. I think that shot is just out of focus. But
blame the cinematographer then, not the director.
But he's ultimately the guy. He's ultimately the guy that is responsible for everything, and he's making these choices. Joe Alves and editor Verna Fields, like, they pitched to co-direct the movie once Hancock is fired, but they're turned down by the Directors Guild Association. I think because there was a rule like you can't replace a director that's part of the DGA if you're not a member of the DGA. And I think that Verna Fields obviously was not a member of the DGA, like she was an editor by trade. So their request is turned down.
I think there were also rules for a long time that you couldn't have co-directors on a movie. That's why the Coen brothers always listed themselves as directed by Joel and produced by Ethan or whatever it was.
I feel like even now there's something like that. I feel like Radio Silence is like talked about, or there's like a limit to like how many directors you can have. So like some people are listed as producers, but it's like they were really directors.
That's like a DGA issue then, I guess, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I know that Tristan, she lobbies and she actually like goes to arbitration with the Writers Guild saying, look, I deserve a writer's credit on this because she's not credited. It's only Sackler and Carl Gottlieb. And she's rejected. Like, she's like, no, like, you didn't do enough work in this and you weren't commissioned to do it. Your ideas weren't really used. So she gets like no credit and therefore no residuals from this movie either. In terms of casting, we'll talk about who they actually went with, like, for directing in a moment. But as they're casting this movie, Robert Shaw is out for obvious reasons. They don't do the thing where they're like, oh, he has a twin brother, Splint, who is going to be on, who's also a sharker. When they're negotiating contracts for the first movie, no one's thinking about a sequel then. No one thinks to lock up Richard Dreyfuss for a future installment. So he goes off and makes Close Encounters with Spielberg instead of coming back for Jaws 2. Roy Schneider is the odd man out for this one. So he is under contract with Universal for 3 movies after Jaws. First up, he does Sorcerer. It's William Friedkin's follow-up to The Exorcist, and it should be a massive hit, right? It is not. It gets swallowed up by Star Wars. And the opening act of the movie confuses audiences. Like, they thought they were in a foreign film because the first act of the movie is in like multiple languages. And they actually, when Sorcerer came out in theaters, like, studios actually wound up sending like poster cards to theaters, like telling audiences the first 20 minutes of this movie they're going to hear multiple languages. It's okay, you're in the right movie.
I love that movie.
That movie's amazing. Masterpiece.
I think like Stephen King has said that's his favorite movie.
Scheider like spends a lot of his own money promoting his performance in The Sorcerer, thinking it's going to win him awards, and it doesn't. He quits his second movie, The Deer Hunter, after his character's role has changed, because originally it's going to be the person who is staying back in Vietnam, and that ends up being Christopher Walken's character. And Walken, I believe, wins the Academy Award for that. So Scheider walks off the movie, so he's still on the hook with Universal for 2 movies, and he's doesn't seem like the best guy to work with. He seems pretty persnickety, and Universal knows they have him now, so they just start sending him offers for movies like they know he'll never take, like just really awful movies that he'll turn down sight on unseen. And they sweeten the deal for him by saying, like, if you come back for Jaws 2, we'll count those as 2 movies and we'll let you out of your contract. So at that point, he's like, all right, I've got to do it. But there's footage of the Scheider doing like press for Jaws 2. And they're like, well, how is Jaws to film? It's like a lot of fun. How is Jaws 2? Like, no fun at all. Like, just right up front, he does not want to be there.
That's really interesting because, I mean, because the production of Jaws 1 is notoriously, like, horrible because the shark keeps breaking. So you always hear Spielberg talk about it. But when it comes to, because we've heard this about Scheider and Jaws 2, and it's kind of a thing where I'm like, I'm surprised to hear him say that Jaws 1 was so much fun to film because I feel like that's a lie.
I think it's less about the movie and more about all the other stuff, quitting movies and roles and being maybe a little bit. Yeah.
Well, because even Swark said, like when they started filming, Scheider was kind of a dick to work with, but once he got into it, he was fine.
Yeah. Yeah. Rachel, you were talking
I was
there.
just
I apologize.
like everything that's happening behind the scenes, I feel like probably tainted it so much more than other. But I will say, considering how openly he has been like negative towards this film, I thought his performance didn't really show that. Like I don't feel like he like phoned it in and was just like fuck you guys. Like I do feel like he actually put out a pretty good performance.
He's a professional.
I have one point in this before we'll talk about when we do like the meat of the movie, but he does not phone it in. Him and Swark, like they get in a fist fight on set. Like they get to the point where they come to blows, and I think like Fields actually had to get between the two of them, and she like bodied Scheider, like just sat on him and like would not let him up. And I think it's like Zanuck had to hold Swark back. And I think they made up after that, and Scheider says, well, it's not really about you. It's really about everything else going on at this point. And like he was like kind of a jerk to Lorraine Gary. He's like, I don't want to be affectionate with her. Like, no, why do I have to do this? Like really being a dick to everybody. And he just spends the whole set like working on his tan. Like just getting
that real leathery look. He looks real leathery.
Yeah,
he does. Yeah.
Okay. How do I pronounce this name? I say Jean Swark, but I think I'm way off.
No,
there.
I think you're. I have definitely like YouTube, like how to pronounce Jean Swark.
So we'll go with it.
Yeah,
he's brought in to direct. Carl Gottlieb is brought back to rewrite the script. Swark also got his start in TV with shows like Night Gallery. His feature film Bug was released the same day as Jaws 1. That was his feature film debut, so it got kind of swallowed up in the wake of Jaws' success. Gottlieb, like he lightens the tone of the movie. He puts a much greater emphasis on the kids. He talks about being hounded when he's writing Jaws 2. Like he's locked in a hotel room in Florida. All the cast and crew are in the same hotel, and every time he would step out of his room, hey, how's the script coming? How's the script coming? He'd go to the bar. The bartender's like, how's Jaws 2 coming along? He's like, this sucks. He's like, I got to get away from this. So he would just barricade himself in his room to write. Like Jaws, it is a very difficult shoot. Swark is definitely not a less is more guy. He wants to show the shark as much as humanly possible. And to be fair, it would be pretty difficult to do what Spielberg did and hide the shark from audiences, right? Yeah. Like you kind of have to show it.
Yeah, it's kind of a thing for me where it's like, I don't know if you like with the Texas Chainsaw Massacre remake, how it looks. It's it looks more sleek and clean. But even though it's the same cinematographer as the original film, and people are like, well, why didn't you do it the same way? And he's like, I already shot this one way. Why the fuck would I want to shoot the same movie the same way again? And that's how I feel about this. Like, yeah, is it less effective to show the shark as much? Absolutely. But if he had copied Spielberg, then we'd all just be saying he's copying Spielberg.
I also think it would have been, honestly, I feel like it would have been boring. It's just like, I don't know, like we're here for the shark now 100%. And I feel like they tease it just enough, but I'm happy when I see the shark.
I almost think that when the shark first makes its appearance in that water skier scene, that's honestly a big surprise the first time you see it. You're like, oh shit, like we're just going right into this.
Right.
Unless you do a different animal, and that's a huge surprise. It's like not actually a shark, but
and
you can't do that every time.
But that's also where, I mean, again, look, as much as I say I would love to see the original version of this movie that was darker and more horror-like leaning, the fact that Jaws 2 does become more of an action-adventure film, I think it works then that you're showing the shark so much, because it doesn't lighten the tone, but it makes, I mean, your goal isn't really suspense in this film.
Yeah. You get excited every time you see the shark.
It's thrilling.
I mean, I agree.
It's a cool looking shark.
I love the design of the shark.
It's a the burn scar and everything.
I was going to ask, where are we on the burns for this?
Well, but that's the thing, though, is, I mean, we can talk about the slasheriness more as we get into the third act, but, like, again, it's not an actual slasher film, obviously. It's a shark movie. But immediately we're like, oh, we're giving the shark, like, a facial feature or a mask. And for a movie that opens, 3 or 4 months before Halloween comes out and kind of sets the stage for the slasher genre, it's oddly prescient in that way.
Well, and the teens, and like there's so many elements of this where it's like, oh, I would have sworn this came out like after Friday the 13th. Like, and it was, I
100%.
Yeah, I thought like when looking stuff up, it's like, oh, they had to have been playing off of that trend, and it's like, oh wait, this came out before all of those. Like
before all of it, like
even down to like one of the characters who's like the horny one is the one that gets eaten. Like before, Halloween does that. Like that is so you would think that this would come out in the wake of Halloween, but it predates it by a solid 3 or 4 months.
I will say too, I mean, like even like with the Eddie death, like you would think because they're being punished for being slutty teenagers, you would think that Tina would be the one to die. But I like that they killed the boy instead.
I would definitely talk more about those elements just shortly here. Filming takes place right off the coast of Florida on Navarre Beach from August 1st until December 22nd. In order to finish this movie, Swark had to film 22 days straight to get everybody home for Christmas. And we're going to go 7 days a week for the last 3 weeks. He did his best to keep the set pretty light. Like every Saturday they would throw parties at the hotel because he's like, look, we need to let everybody cut loose. Like he knew how hard it was to like, he honestly seemed like he did a really good job keeping the cast loose, especially with all those teenagers. The teens in this movie, like they all talk about, like one of the teens is a former Massachusetts governor and former Democratic presidential candidate Michael Dukakis. Like it's his son, John Dukakis is one of them. He just talked, everyone just got high and fucked and like basically on set all the time. Ricky Schroeder was originally tapped to play Sean. He is fired after Swark takes over. He's replaced with Mark Gilpin, who plays Sean. Years later, Gilpin's hired as a recurring character on Silver Spoons, the sitcom that Schroeder is stars in. And allegedly, Schroeder's mom is still so pissed off at Gilpin taking over for her son that she has him fired on Silver Spoons.
That's kind of, I mean, well, luckily Schroeder has The Champ coming out like the year after this, so he's fine.
Yeah. He's okay. He did okay for himself in the end. Oh, it's also some really complicated shots, like the helicopter. That is a very complicated thing to shoot. Cable Junction, which is one of the sets they built, it's like a floating set that's anchored down in the ocean. It loses its moorings at one point and just starts floating off towards Cuba. So they have to like rescue the set. I want to talk about John Williams. He returns for the score in this, and I don't think it can be overstated how important like him coming back is to help this film succeed.
I love this score. Like John Williams did not have to go as hard as he did. Like it's still very familiar, but he adds enough new flourishes that, I mean, like there's my favorite music cue in the film is when Mike knocks his head and falls in the water and they're trying to pick him up and the sharks, the camera's on the shark's back and then you have these trumpets that are just like do 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 do. Love it.
Yeah, no, it's so great. Good, but I love that he introduces new elements. Like they didn't pull a thing where it's like with Death Wish, where it's like, oh, you just literally reused the exact same cues and just like stuck them in there and didn't even properly hire him to come back or anything. But that's another thing. But
John Williams at his best, I mean, he makes any movie he writes for better. I mean, he makes Space
that's
Camp
true.
better. I mean, it's there. So, I mean, this is sort of at the height of his abilities, and so it really does make a huge difference.
It feels like an evolution of the first score rather than a rehash, which I really
and I think he understood that this one was maybe a little bit more playful, because there's some moments in it where it's like, oh, this is just like kind of fun, silly, like almost like campy music, or like when they're showing all like the tourists at the beach, like it's really kind of just. It's just, I don't know, it's fun, and it's like, oh, he understood that, like, this is a little bit different than the first one, and I'm gonna, like, I don't know, expand upon those moments, and wasn't afraid to do that, which was nice.
So interestingly enough, the score for the first film is kind of what trained me as a movie viewer as a child to learn when score signifies what's going to happen. Because there's parts in the first movie, I'm watching the first movie as a kid, I'm fucking terrified. But when they first, like the three men go out in the boat, it's like this really adventure, like almost pirate type score. Yes. And I remember as a kid being like, oh, this means that nothing bad's going to happen right now. So I can like relax for a bit.
he does something too when he introduces the teens in this movie, and it's this really like high spirited, it's fun, it's like out on the beach type of like out on the water music. He incorporates like the two notes, the da-dum, da-dum, but it's really fast and sped up and playful. So it kind of signifies like these kids have no idea what sort of danger they're actually in, and also kind of like gives this sort of idea like later on, like these two things are going to intersect, like the kids and the shark are going to intersect with one another, but it's not done in a scary way in its introduction, and I really love that. And Rachel, we didn't have you on for Jaws, but could you speak a little bit about what you think it is that makes Williams like so special as a composer? Because I said in the first movie, like he's our Beethoven, like he's the modern day equivalent of Mozart or Beethoven, but I don't know. Actually, I have two music specialists here, like Brian, you as well. Like, what is it about the way Williams composes that sets him apart and makes him so special?
I mean, he's a master of themes. Like he manages to boil things down and just like encapsulate, you know, the spirit of a film in a really powerful theme. And for Jaws, it's something very simple, very primal, very like driving. Like he looks at things very thoughtfully, I feel like, stories, and he becomes inspired by that and creates just, I mean, I was terrified of Jaws before I saw Jaws because of the music. Like that theme was used against me. And like that's I think that's just so interesting that like the music, and knowing that it was associated with a shark, you know, 5-year-old me was like, oh, this is scary. This makes sense. And I think that he just understands music and the way it affects people so brilliantly and intimately that he's able to put those into just some of the most iconic themes of our time. Like there's so many John Williams themes you can play for anybody on the street and be like, what is this from? What is this one? What is this from? And people will know it. And that's, I think, just incredibly impressive. And he's a magical, beautiful human.
I think he also knows when not to use music, which is really smart, because in the first one, they repeats that a little bit here too, is they only used that theme when it's the actual shark. Yeah. So when you have the kids with the fake cardboard fin, there's no theme. Yeah. And that tricks you, because when he's chumming, come down and chum some of this shit, the shark comes out, there's no music. And it makes it so much better and so much more of a startling thing, because you do not expect anything to happen. Yeah.
And we're going to see this happen in horror pretty quickly after this, right?
Halloween
like you're gonna,
is Halloween is
Friday the
Jaws.
13th, like Friday the 13th, like the like that is we, you know, telling us that, well, we think Jason or, you know, Mrs. Voorhees is around, and we're like that music is our clue to look and like in the shadows, right, and search the shadows for that creature. What is it? We can hear it before we see it, and so that's something that I think we can trace back to Jaws and Peeping Tom. Even it's like those little cues that you're gonna like. That's gonna be hugely influential, obviously, in horror moving forward.
There's also, like, Williams has the ability to kind of borrow from his previous scores in ways that it feels familiar, but it doesn't feel recycled. Like, I'm thinking in Jaws, at the end of the movie, when Brody is leaning out on the mast trying to shoot the shark, like, it sounds, the musical cues there sound very similar to those at the end of Star Wars, where Luke is, like, flying down the trench. It has those, like, quick notes, like the tension is building up, the action is building up, and they sound familiar. I'm thinking of like Empire Strikes Back and Raiders, like Leia and Han's like love theme, very, very similar to Indy and Marion's love theme in those two movies. Like, but they don't. You recognize them, and you kind of recognize the emotions they're going for without sounding like carbon copies of one another.
He has a clear style, I think is what, I mean, you can pretty much recognize, that's John Williams right there.
Well, and he understands.
I think you can with Bernard Herrmann, too, is kind of that way as well. And Max Steiner and, I don't know, Mike, Thomas Newman's another one where I I hear him and it's like, yeah, that's a Thomas Newman score.
They understand how music works in film specific, which is something, it's like, you know, yes, it's
different than,
they're fabulous composers and musicians, but they, I think, have a really good handle, just, you know, say the least, on how music operates with a film.
So moving on really quick to the marketing, it has three things going for it. Number one, it's following up Jaws. And that by this time, like, they've released Jaws into theaters a couple times to get people pumped for Jaws 2. It makes its television debut right before Jaws 2 comes out, and it gets something like a 58% share, which basically means 3 out of every 5 homes in the country that had their televisions on tuned in to watch Jaws make its TV debut, which is amazing. That's like 2 Super Bowls playing simultaneously in terms of the share. It has an all-time great tagline for a sequel, like just when you thought it was safe to go back in the water is the tagline, which is incredible. It doesn't get any better than that. And that poster, all right, how good is the poster to Jaws 2? And are we a little bit let down that it doesn't actually come up and swallow her whole?
So I was actually curious because I've seen the main poster is the one of the shark jumping up behind the skier, but I've also seen one specifically on the album cover where it's just like a sunset on the water and you see the fin. That's all you see. And I actually prefer that poster because, again, I think it's just ominous and it looks really cool with the sunset. But I kind of don't agree about the skier because I think it's really fun that we get these POV shots of the shark like up on the ski. I mean, could it be like more gory, I guess? Like, yeah, I guess, fine. But like, I kind of don't mind it, if only because we see the shark like right after that. So it's kind of like, it's going to subvert our expectations.
I remember looking at, you know, obviously the video cassette sitting side by side in the horror section of Jaws 2 and 3. And the Jaws 2 one was always the one, not just because it was a sequel, but just the way the shark looked, something about that, and just that idea, because I knew people who water skied and stuff like that, just that idea of something that is so familiar, and this monster that is just bigger than her, you know, by, you know, I don't know, it felt like 100 feet at the time, but, you know, just smashing up out of the water to grab them was just horrifying to me. So
I think we've all been fooled by box covers, right? You know, it's like, oh, that's not even in the movie. You lied, Demon Wind. I didn't see that at all. You know, like,
what was the box art for Jaws 3? Is it like all the? It's all the skiers again, isn't it? It's like
it's all the skiers, and there's like a shark fin going through.
Yes,
and then it has the you know, sort of the icon from the first
and then like one of the skiers is like falling, like reaching for the friend, and it also that scene is also like, oh, that's it in Jaws 3.
That's it. I know. Yeah.
I feel like the poster you mentioned, Trace, I would want to hang that one on my wall.
It's so good. It's so good.
A gorgeous poster.
Actually, you can't see it, but I have a poster, a Mondo poster for Nightmare on Elm Street 4 on my wall. And it's Freddy's glove in the sand, and it says, "Just when you thought it was safe to go back to bed."
Nice.
That's great. So I think like I'd want to frame and hang that one. But in terms of like if I walk into a movie theater and I'm looking at like coming soon and you see all the posters up, the water skier one is going to be the one that's going to get me pumped. Like that's where the money is.
It also makes sense. Like before the first Jaws, you know, it's under the water, and now that's like this
now
one.
It's
like we know the shark is going to be the shark.
Yeah. So speaking of money, let's talk money. Comes out June 16th, 1978. Grosses just under $10 million in its opening weekend, which at that point is a record. And again, it's at a time where movie tickets are like $2.25. So that is a lot of people going to see this movie. Oh my goodness. On its first initial run in the theaters, it makes just under $78 million, or about 2.5 times its about $30 million budget. Crosses $100 million on re-release, makes just under $210 million worldwide. Dang. So it only makes about 40% of the box office of Jaws, but that's better than they anticipated.
Yeah.
Again, sequels weren't expected to make more money. Like they're thought of as lesser than the first movie.
It's weird because watching some of those extra features on the Blu-ray, they're like, oh yeah, like we were hoping for at least a third of what Jaws made, and I was like, that's what you were hoping for?
Yeah.
So, and that's the thing though, like this was a huge fucking hit. And it always surprises me when people talk about, the Jaws sequels. And I'm like, yeah, but y'all, that second one was a big fucking deal in 1978.
It was the 6th highest grossing movie of the year, and I think, is that the year that Superman the movie comes out? I think that's 78, right? Which I think is the number one movie of that year. And my personal favorite score of John Williams is the Superman theme. It's the number one top grossing sequel until 1980 when Empire Strikes Back comes out. So just like Jaws is number one for a little while, it's eclipsed by Star Wars shortly thereafter.
Oh my god, one of the highest because this is also the same year. Oh, that's the thing. So Jaws 2 opens the same day that Grease comes out. And Grease doesn't open as well as Jaws 2, but it legs it out for the whole summer, whereas Jaws 2 doesn't leg it out.
No, that's Jaws 2 definitely front loaded. Definitely going to be like you're going to rush out to see it. And I'm trying to think of the last movie that really had those kind of legs or just legged it out forever. And maybe, God, it might have been the first Avatar movie, but I'm thinking like the first Scream movie takes it's in the top 5 forever. It's never the number one movie.
Well, so here's your comparison. Jaws 2, opens at 10 million, goes to 77.7 million. Grease opens with 8 million and legs it out to 159 million.
Jesus.
I love Grease.
I have never watched
Grease. I love Grease too.
I love Grease.
Okay.
But I mean, that's the thing, right? Like, how long was Grease in the top 10 movies? Like, it just stayed there. Whereas Jaws 2 just didn't have that luck, but it's still.
Well, I remember that also. I remember Titanic. Just, sucking all the. I mean, and the thing is that when it opened, people were like, "Oh, okay, Titanic," but then it just kept going
through April. Like that opened in December and was
then it dropped to number 2. Then it came back to number 1. Then it went to number 3. Then went back to, and then The Dark Knight was another one like that where it just kept going and going forever. Whereas like Avatar just kind of came out and just. It stayed number one, then go.
You know what? Another big success like that is My Big Fat Greek Wedding from 2002.
That's
I think that legged it out to $300 million.
Crazy.
I miss those days. I miss when you could see a movie. You could go 2 months in and go back and see a movie in the theaters. And now, I think it's a bad thing when a movie's in theaters for 3 weeks and then all of a sudden you can rent it at home. Like that doesn't help. That doesn't help.
I think, I'm going to say it, the Fast and Furious films too. Because Fast 4 was awful, but then Fast 5 came out, and I think that one did because I think people maybe weren't expecting it, and then it was like, oh no, this is a really great movie, and those are billion-dollar movies.
I still have yet to see a single Fast and Furious.
Same.
We're doing it. Ari and I are having our own Patreon spinoff, and you two are going to watch them with us, and it's going to be
great. I'll tell you right now, as someone who does not like the first movie at all, the second one's meh. I think Tokyo Drift is fine. Fast and Furious is not good.
No.
But 5 through 8. Because I do like 8, actually. 9 is not good, but I actually really had a lot of fun with 10. So, totally worth it. You got to get past those first couple movies, because I don't think the first half of them are very good.
Rachel, I'll tell you that on Prime Day, I had the first 9 movies in my cart ready to go. Hit checkout. And then when it said because right now I'm home alone, I can just watch movies all day, every day. I'm on summer break. Wasn't going to arrive until August 31st.
Oh, jeez.
And I'm like, I took it out of the cart, and I think I got Taxi Driver in a 4K of the Lost Boys instead on special.
I'm going to tell you, 6 is my favorite one, if only because you get to see Michelle Rodriguez beat the shit out of Gina Carano.
That's true.
Excellent. I'm sold. All right. I will have to order these then. So I'll ask Rachel, do I order the first 9 on Blu-ray for $35
yes,
or the first 8 on 4K for $45?
Ooh.
Is it worth getting in 4K?
I mean, I am not a huge 4K I don't have a 4K
but for $10 more for getting all of them in 4K,
with one less movie,
that's worth it. That's fine. That's fine.
Okay. That's the route we're going to go then. I will report back, so I have to watch all of the Saw and all of the Fast and Furious.
Wait, have you not seen the Saw movies?
I've only seen the first two in
You
Jigsaw.
are going on some wild rides, and I am here for it.
Also, Saw 6, low-key one of the best ones in that franchise.
That's what I hear. That's what I hear.
Yeah, I agree on that, actually.
All right. Yeah. Trace, I know you have a hard out in an hour and 10 minutes, and we are going in some wild directions.
Sorry,
so,
that's my fault.
No, I love it. I love it. Because we've actually covered a lot of like some of the movie discussion stuff. So, all right, have a great week, everybody. We're done. So I'll ask this, like, is the biggest flaw of Jaws 2 when people say, like, oh, like you said, Trace, oh, the Jaws sequels. This is a legit, like, fun and good movie. Is its biggest flaw simply that it's not Jaws?
Yeah. And again, I don't even call that a flaw. I just think that's the public mindset. Like, if Jaws didn't exist and this was the first entry, I mean, somehow, you know, I think this would be a much higher regarded film.
Yeah. I agree. I think it's a little disjointed sometimes.
Yeah.
Like, it's like, wait, is it a team story? Is it a Brody story? Like, but that's merely because, yes, I'm comparing it to the first one. Like, if I had no association with the first one, I'd probably, I would love this. I mean, I do love it, but it would be, it would put it in a different light, I think. Look at it through a different lens.
Agree with you. I think that this would be a super well-regarded movie if Jaws 2 was the first movie. It probably wouldn't be like considered like an all-time great movie. And I don't think it would launch the summer blockbuster as we know it, but I still think it would be a hit. I think that if you release this movie on its own, people would still turn up for this.
But I think a lot of the 3-star ratings would be 4-star ratings if this wasn't a sequel.
Yeah. I do think that one of the reasons why it gets knocked down a peg is that it often, and it's a complaint I have about the Elm Street remake. Like Trace, I think you talked about the Texas Chainsaw remake, and I know how much you love that movie because that does its own thing in a different way. Like it feels like a Texas Chainsaw, but to its credit, it does its own thing. When I watch like the Elm Street remake, I'm always like, why am I not watching Wes Craven's movie?
Yeah.
Like it's aping that movie. This kind of does that a lot. Like it mirrors a lot of the same scenes and the same sequences. You have, like, instead of the swimmer Chrissy going out, you have the water skier going out. You have the 4th of July scene. You have the adventure in the high seas. You have the mayor not listening. And at times, you're like, why am I not just watching Jaws at that point? But I still think that it does things well enough where it is a super enjoyable romp, like on its own. It's a fun movie on its own.
Well, but that's where I think too that the stuff with Brody and his evolution as a character, I think that's what makes it work. So you're right. Like a lot of this, we're just kind of like riffing set pieces from the first film, but it's the advanced like character knowledge, and like I think that's what pulls you through to the end of this movie.
I think that you do get more with Brody. We're going to definitely talk about him. Where I don't think it does a lot of the victims justice. And I'm not saying that Jaws, you have like the most fully formed characters of all time, but you get just enough with Chrissy at the beginning of the movie, like watching her swim, seeing how graceful she is, like just like hanging around the campfire with those kids, like, oh, this seems like a really fun night. And then she's killed. You feel for her. Alex Kittner, that little moment he shares with his mom before he goes out. Even Pippin the dog, you know enough about all of the victims where you really feel for them. Where here, like you're presented these two, like, you know, these two palookas that are under the water, you know, and they get eaten right away. Don't know anything about
these
them
rich
whatsoever.
guys going down to take pictures of a wreck.
That is the thing with the
Weird.
That is the thing with the opening of this film. Like, I think it's really cool to revisit the side of the orca, but it's like, again, I get it. You can't match the brilliance of Chrissy's death scene in the opening film, but the opening of this film is such a kind of like a shrug that you're like, okay.
I don't know. The Ocean Gate people maybe should have learned from them. I just say.
Ooh, and plus that camera, I mean, it just keeps taking pictures for on its own. Which is amazing.
You don't have to hit the button; you just got to hit the camera itself.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's a little bit confusing the way it's shot too. It's just like a bunch of screaming and you know, you don't get it.
That's in both of these first two Jaws movies. I love like the sound of men screaming underwater.
But I do, and let's talk about Brody in this movie. Let's talk about his further development, because I do think Scheider does a great job returning to this character and giving you just enough. And I think every great hero needs a great foil, and I don't necessarily think that the shark is the foil in this movie, where Jaws didn't really have a villain. And we'll talk about the mayor again here. You get like Joe Mascolo, like being the shady real estate developer Peterson. He's a definite antagonist for Brody in this movie, like a great all-time like eat the rich villain, right?
Mm-hmm. Did y'all watch the deleted scenes for this?
There's one where he gives him a ticket, right?
Yeah, so there's a scene in the very beginning when he drives his wife to work, and he gives her boss, this guy, a ticket, and he won't, like, budge on it. He's like, no, sorry, dude, I don't like you. And so it immediately sets up their kind of, like, antagonism and rivalry.
Yeah. Yeah, and Peterson's like, come on, like, what are you doing here? It's like, nope, the rules are the rules, like, because he knows, like, this guy, Peterson, has eyes on Ellen. Like there's some clear tension there that goes beyond two guys that don't like one another. Like Peterson seems like the kind of boss that will sexually harass the staff.
But I like, though, that doesn't actually come to anything, because it does kind of seem like a holdover from Peter Benchley's novel, where she has an affair with the Hooper character. And this movie doesn't need that at all, just like the first movie didn't need that.
It also, I think it's a really funny, like, you know, you can look at, because we've got this hotel opening, right? And like Amityville's changing, and it's just kind of like this hungry beast, right? That is like capitalism and like exploiting this oceanside town. And you've got kind of, you know, the Brody. I know they haven't been there that long, but it's kind of like the old school Amity versus like this new idea of what like Amity could be, and the tourism, and like, no, we're not going to listen to you, because we want it to be like that. I don't know. It's just kind of a funny dynamic, but they don't force it, and I like that. It's just very subtle, and of course you can read into it like I am, or not, but it still works.
And the Brodies are, even though they've established themselves on the island, they're still considered outsiders. Like you have that moment in the first movie. It's like, no, if you're not born here,
you're not an islander.
Not an islander. Yeah. And there was that contingent of people in Martha's Vineyard who did not want Jaws to shoot there. Like they would go out and they would sabotage the set after hours. Like they would pour sugar in the gas tanks and spray paint. Like they would like graffiti the sets, because like they didn't want these outsiders here. And what's interesting in Jaws 2 is both Peterson and Brody are outsiders, but Peterson seems like he's immediately embraced because he's throwing money around. Like he is seen more as one of them than Brody has ever been seen, which part of it is ACAB, of course. You know, Brody's a cop. But Peterson is just kind of stimulating the economy and like throwing his big piles of cash around. I'll ask this. Is anyone, because this came up a lot during COVID when people were rewatching Jaws, and people would say like, oh, don't forget, like Mayor Vaughn is still the mayor in Jaws 2. Are we surprised that Vaughn is the mayor in the second movie? Aside from the fact that you want to bring back, you know, Murray Hamilton. Are we surprised that Vaughn is still the mayor? Because I'm not
people have
really.
Short memories.
No, I mean, I don't think they give him any blame for what happened. And the thing is, it was also like, it's almost like we think of Jaws as this epic thing, right? You know, it's really only takes place over a few days.
It's like a week.
So it's like this one blip in the entire term of his.
It's also like the members of the citizens of Amity Island haven't seen Jaws. They're not seeing these communications, these conversations between Brody and the mayor, where he's like, "No, money, I like money. Like, there's no shark
they
here."
Don't know.
Like they don't know that shit.
Right.
Even if the newspaper wrote about it, like, I mean, come on, people don't read the news. Be like,
It's like, hey, remember, don't forget, he hired Brody, and Brody's the hero, and you know, so that's probably what he ran for re-election on.
If
right?
you're the mayor, you can say, "I hired Quint."
Yes,
there
was a problem.
August.
I
like,
fixed
you
it.
can definitely say, like, I was able to save August.
He hired a spin doctor, like a crisis PR person, and was like, "Hey, fix this."
Yeah. So I think Vaughn is portrayed like a lot more sympathetically in this movie. Like, even though I don't blame him for not immediately believing Brody, like when Brody says, "I think there's another shark," because that's human nature. Like, we've been through this trauma. You don't want to believe it's going to return. Like, you're going to do everything in your power to deny it until it's really staring you in the face, right?
But his reaction,
So it swims up and bites you on the ass.
but his reaction when Brody tells him, it's not immediate. Like you're a fucking idiot. He's like,
Yeah.
are you serious? Like, like what?
It's true, right?
Yeah. There is that deleted scene too, like when Brody is fired, they show the vote, and the mayor is the only one that votes to keep Brody as sheriff. Like, he doesn't want people.
And I do think they should have kept that but the issue is also because Murray Hamilton's like wife was sick or something, so he had to leave production, and so they shot all of his shit really quick. But
they did it over like 3 days.
But I do think that it would have helped to, maybe not help. It's like a 30-second extra scene. Like, it's not even long. But to be like, oh, good. Like, it honestly feels like a good closure, like a send-off for that character. To be like, oh, good, finally. Like, he spent the first movie not believing this guy and not sticking up for him. So for his last scene to be standing up for Brody, I think that would have been a really important thing to keep in.
Yeah. I think that Brody is reinstated after the events of this movie, right? I mean, like, he saved the mayor's kid. I feel like he's going to be reinstated as chief.
If I was him, I would have cut the dorsal fin off that shark, walked right into City Hall, and been like, "Here, fuckers," and then quit and leave the island.
I'm kind of shocked after the first at the events of Jaws that they stayed. I mean, I know you get that scene in the hospital when they're like, we're going home. But after I just watched a guy get eaten and all of that shit, I already don't like the water. I'd be like, I could probably be like a small town sheriff in the Midwest, like a landlocked state, right?
I think I'm more surprised that Sean isn't like more traumatized, because remember, he's the one that gets like the interaction of the shark with the like the pond or whatever, and you would think that would have more like long lasting effects on this kid.
I thought it was Mike. Like, Mike is the one on
Mike?
the boat. Sean's sitting on the
Sean's on the shore.
Okay,
Either way,
Mike
they
should
like,
have more
throughout
PTSD.
this entire franchise, I feel like they're never like really properly traumatized.
Oh, yeah.
No.
Why does Mike go work at SeaWorld in Jaws 3?
Yeah, and then even like Sean is like, oh, I don't like
Inexplicable.
going in the water, but then he does because like a babe, like a
'Cause Leah
babe is
Thompson's
like,
there and he
yeah,
wants
just
to
come
fuck
in.
her.
He's like, okay.
Okay. I said this when Steven and I recorded like a bonus episode on The Killers from 1946. I said Ava Gardner is the kind of woman you'd go to prison over for 3 years. Leah Thompson is the kind of woman at that time you would definitely go in the water for, even if you're scared of the water.
Well, they immediately get knocked over. Their little inner tube flips over. So
Yeah. And then they shouldn't even die. They just swim to the shore.
I'll take that risk. I do like some of the way they continue. Like, Brody is better with the water, but still unsure. Like, there's that line in the first movie, like, you don't even get out of your car when you're riding the ferry. And when you see him in the ferry in this movie, he's sitting in his car. Like, they continued that over. He doesn't immediately run into the water when he sees like the part of the boat that's been capsized. I do like they continue those things with Brody, but he'll still do what he has to do. He'll do what has to be done. So we were talking a bit about Lorraine Gary and her role in this movie and how maybe she got the short shrift. I still think that the interactions with her and Brody are one of the real strengths. There's a little bit of tension. There's a little bit of that. Like, she's criticizing Martin for smoking too much, which everybody is like lighting up like crazy in this movie. So that I almost felt like that was a dig on Scheider. Basically like a little kind of way to acknowledge, like, dude, like, you got to lay off the lung darts there a little bit, my friend. She's like, I wish you would spend more time with the kids. And he's like, well, I have a job to do. But overall, like, they are always there for each other when they need to.
Even when he gets fired, like, she's so supportive of him. I love too when they walk out and like there's all those beer cans in the grass by the car.
Yeah, I love that.
And she's like, "You old so and so."
she like she's so. There's some moments where it's just like so sweet and realistic to me. I think when it's just like it feels like she really knows this person because they're just having, and it's like she checks on him a little bit, like, "Are you sure you're okay?" And it's like she knows he's not, but also like not going to talk about it right now. But she's just like letting him know that she knows, and it feels very real to me. Just that kind of like, all right, well, I'm here, and I understand, that kind of thing. And with his son too, there's a moment where they're like on the, just the way like Brody's looking at his son it's just so sweet. And it's just these simple, subtle things that really just like, oh, this feels like a family.
Yeah, one of the biggest laughs for me too is whenever Brody's like, "Why does everyone care about boats and swimming?" It's
Yes.
like, it's an island.
Well, and like
Such a
trying
good
to let her
line.
son
It's
just
such a
like have a
great line.
summer, and he's like, "No, you got to get a job," and she's like, "But it's summer." Like that's just like such a sweet mom thing. Like just let him enjoy. Like he's just having fun with his friends, and oh god, so cute.
And we have like kind of the opposite dynamic in our house where like my wife loves making lists and like, you know, we have chores we do. Like I have a set list and my daughter has a set list. I am often the one that will let Ada out. I'm like, oh, your friends, like you haven't done your chores and like your friends want to have a pool party. I'm like, go to your friends. Like the chores will be here when you get back because, you know, it's summertime. I want you to like go spend time with your friends because like school's going to intrude soon enough. And but they're not like we're not argumentative about it. They're not that here. It's like just two people that want something a little bit different, but they never really like fight over it. And Brody doesn't really put his foot down until he thinks there's danger, and he's using the job as more of an excuse to keep his son safe, more so than like I want him to have a real job. And I like that like Mike is the way that interact. It feels like a very realistic portrayal of like a teenager and like their dad. Like they're gonna argue with one another, they're gonna butt heads with one another, but at the same time they're still family, they still love and care for one another. How grounded is Mike at the end of like if there's like a bonus scene in Jaws 2 where they get back to shore after, okay, on a scale of 1 to 10, how grounded is Mike for A, going out on the ocean after he was told not to, and B, like bringing Sean with him? Like he's not seeing the beach, let alone a boat.
The thing is, like, I think his family, his parents, are just going to be happy he's alive, so they're not going to like punish him necessarily. I don't know. Do you think Mike wants to go back out? Like, multiple of his friends died.
Yes.
Excuse me. Jaws 3. Jaws.
I guess that's
also,
true.
Jaws 4. His brother dies, and he's like, let's go swim in the Bahamas.
Yeah.
I'm going to go research conch shells.
And then he gets really excited when there's a shark. And I'm like, dude, your brother was just killed by a shark.
Yeah.
So weird.
It's again,
These poor boys.
Jaws the Revenge, not a good movie. But I think this kid's grounded for the rest of the summer.
Yes.
I mean, like, yes, you're happy he's safe. That's great. He's safe. And I've always told my daughter, like, look, when you get older and you go to parties, like, if you are ever with friends and they're drinking, you call us right away. I will always pick you up. No questions asked. I will give you a safe ride home. And you won't be grounded. In this case, though, where he's like because you want your kid to be safe, that only lasts so long. Eventually you wake up and you're like, oh, I'm glad you're safe. But the other thing is, like, I told you, don't go in the fucking water. And certainly not bring the cute kid with you.
None of them have boats anymore, right? They're all just
True.
Like, what are they going to go out on the water?
Well, and I'm going to tell you right now, if I'm Brody, I'm going to be like, look, fuckers, next time I say there might be a shark, you listen to me.
I wish I saw more payoff with like the cyanide bullets.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like I love the electrocution. Like love it. I think it's brilliant. I think it looks great. I think it's really funny. I wish they would have gone back to town and everything would have been dark.
That was fantastic.
But like I wish because he's like, I think it's really cool like what he's doing with the bullets and just kind of like how he's hiding it because he doesn't want people to know he's onto this, like has this idea. I wish a little bit more had happened with that. But
I wonder while he's making those, is this like a thing? Is this something that people could actually do? I don't know. I'm genuinely curious how that.
How much cyanide does it take to kill a great white shark? More like a drop?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Is he going to use it on town hall? If he
There you
going to get
go.
drunk? Is he
God.
going to get? He gets like as a darker version of this, or after he gets fired, he gets super drunk and then takes everybody out.
I'm telling you the order too. I would kill that, Lorraine Gary's boss first, but then I would go for that bitch who's like, "What am I looking at in this picture? I don't see anything." Kill her next.
She's in the first person in the first movie too. She's the one. I don't think that's funny.
Yes.
That's not funny.
Well, and I always get her confused with Alex Kintner's mom because those actresses look exactly the same.
They do. She looks a bit more weathered. Like, she's a bit more leathery.
Well, here's the weird thing, and I said this on our show too. Alex Kintner's mom looks exactly like my mom did around that age, and it is the most bizarre thing. So every time I watch Jaws, I was like, I swear my mom just before she got married, just went out and made this movie, and then witness relocation program, and I mean, it's bizarre.
Could your mom deliver a slap like Alex Kintner's mom?
Hell yeah. Well, probably no, I don't think so.
You answered that very quickly. Yes.
I don't have any frame of reference to know.
Sure.
So, yeah. Yeah, sure.
Oh, please. Let's talk about the kids. Let's talk about the teens in this movie. And I don't necessarily know their names, so I gave them some nicknames. So let me kind of run through some of them here for you. I have Dungeons and Dragons, which one of them is Keith Gordon, the two nerdy kids. I had Miss Amity runner-up. She is the one that is on the boat with the rest of the kids. Like, she looks like the girl who won Miss Amity, but didn't quite win.
Wait, is she the blonde girl that prays to God and stuff?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. So you could also call her Jesus Freak.
Yeah.
I had Buff Shelley from Friday the 13th, Part 3.
Yep.
Oh, yeah, totally.
And then Mayor Vaughn's kid is the love child of Mark Wahlberg and Nelson Muntz.
Yes! This is fun.
So, and then there's the kid with the scally cap, who I really like. Like, he actually looked like a kid I went to elementary school with, but no one would get the reference if I said he looks like Steve Peaslack. Like, nobody would know who that is.
That's Bob. That's the one whose death scene is removed from the film.
That's Bob?
Yeah.
Okay. Wow, so he doesn't die in...
Yeah, well, so I'd have to look at it again to see, but it's very much a do you see him get to Cable Junction? I don't know, but
you do.
Okay,
because he's resting on the rocks, going, "Thank God, thank God." You have the
this won't help. Yeah, this won't help listeners, but click that.
Yeah, I was gonna say this is very exciting for our listeners, right?
But you can see the shot of him on his boat as the shark is coming for him.
Let's see. Yep, there it is. Is that him? I don't see the hat. I only know him by the hat.
Wait.
So.
Well, the hat probably fell off.
Oh, okay.
Well, yeah, but look.
That's a good point.
No, that's him.
It says Billy Van Zandt as Bob.
Mm-hmm.
Excellent. Okay. Excellent. And then there is the horny teens like Eddie and I don't remember.
Tina.
I just remember his name. Tina. Okay. So, yeah, that's how I know these kids as. But I will say, even though they're not the best developed group, the movie does go out of the way to make them very sympathetic. Like, they're a pretty likable group. I really like that when they are stranded on the ocean, all of them are pulling together. They're all working with one another. They're all trying to save one another. It's really well done. And I think that it kind of wants to be American Graffiti on boats. Like Gottlieb said, he wrote this with American...
the cruising culture stuff. Yeah.
And Gottlieb's I don't think there's a cruising culture for sailing, but it sounded really fun, so why not do it?
Yeah.
I think he does a really good job of showing, if you're a kid on this island, it probably does get boring after a while. You get shitty weather for 6 months of the year. You get a couple months of nice summer weather. But there's not much to do except, sail a boat and go on the ocean.
Mm-hmm. And they're all they retain their likability, because, when Shelly's drinking the punch, he's like, "Oh, did your mom do all this? Yeah. Did she make the punch? No. Okay, good, because it sucks." But checks to make sure that I'm not going to insult his mom. I'm going to make sure. Okay,
and
great.
it's also because here's the thing. I'm even going to excuse the one-dimensional characters. But although that does kind of it's a kind of a trait of the slasher films, right? Granted, had this film been all about the kids instead of having the third act be about the kids, that would have been Remedy. But I almost don't mind it, because I do find all these kids likable. Even Jackie, screamer as she is. I just wish more of them would have died. That's my only big gripe with the third act of this film.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think Jackie would have been a bit redeemed if we saw that Bob bitten in half. Like, you could understand her screaming gets to be a bit much after.
Oh, yeah.
That. Like, okay, there's nothing going on right now. Like, you need to cool your jets a little bit. And Jack,
she commits to it though. She got
does.
she looks like
She got that page boy haircut too.
Shaking her head and just like really free. She goes for it.
And you know, like, Shelley's a good friend. Shelley is trying to keep Mike out of trouble. Like, he's the one saying, like, we don't even need to go. So let's just hang on the beach and, like, try to pick up girls. Like, he doesn't want to see his friend get in trouble. And Jackie is the one who's like, do you do everything your father tells you? It's like, oh, Jackie, what are you doing here? Why are we acting
That's
like
kind of
this?
the funny thing, right? Like, she's kind of a bad girl, and then she just, like, they kind of lose that character trait of her. But I kind of buy into it, right? Like, she puts on a tough act because she's never been stalked by a shark before.
No.
Yeah.
Look. If I'm getting stalked by a shark, I'm freaking out, okay? I am not going to be poised. I am probably screaming my head off, too. So what do I once, when I was cooking outside on my deck, some bees came out, and I just screamed, bees, at the top of my lung, ran in the house and said, get your coat, we're going out to eat tonight. So what do I know about bravery? Okay, and I'll say, like, the one thing I'll say is the stuff with Brody and the stuff with the teens. If I have a fault in the movie, it does feel like they're filming two completely separate movies. Like, they don't feel together, and I wonder how much of that is, like, Scheider being kind of a dick on set, and they're like, all right, we kind of got to keep these guys apart from one another. Like, I don't want him to poison it. Because it does feel like they're two separate movies that are going on. Everything with Brody and the town, and everything with the teenagers, which is kind of teenage life to a certain degree.
Right.
Like, kids go off and do their own thing and have their own secret little world and do whatever they want, but it feels too separate from one another.
I think, too, I mean, like, this movie's almost 2 hours long. I think it's 5 minutes shy of 2 hours. And granted, the first one I think is 2 hours, but...
just over it.
But, there are a couple pacing issues. Like, there are scenes I do think that drag in this movie, and so I think a tighter edit would maybe fix some of these issues.
Yeah.
I agree.
I paused it last night when it gets to, like, Brody getting on the police boat and going out, and I'm like, there is still 40 minutes left in this movie. Like, it shocked me. That said, this is a great third act. Like, this is a lot of fun. I would say that, like, Eddie's death is worthy of every... It is good as anything in Jaws. Like, that is a phenomenally filmed death. It's really tense. It's scary. And it is super violent. Like, him getting, like, slammed into the boat and then holding it so hard he pulls a chunk of it off when he gets dragged out. That's fucking awesome.
Also his breathing, because when he's yelling for Tina, he's like... But yeah, it feels, like, viscerally real.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I think
it feels traumatic, like, and then she's like catatonic, like curled up in the boat, and it's like I can understand.
I don't know if y'all remember this, but like a month ago or
yeah.
something on Twitter, there was all these like, oh, like show your like most like realistic portrayal of fear in a movie. This girl who plays Tina is like, I buy her fears. This girl's fucked for life.
Yep.
Yeah.
She's just hiding in the boat, basically, making herself as small as possible. And like the makeup work they do on her, like when they pull her out of that boat, like she is ashen, like she is terror struck. You're right, and it's a great moment. Absolutely think that is worthy of anything that you see in the first Jaws movie. I really like how all that is done. And you mentioned how like the breathing and like that real visceral terror. From what I read, like the actor who played Eddie was not necessarily a very strong swimmer.
He couldn't swim.
So he's probably very afraid when he's out there.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, I'm not a great swimmer, and if I'm in over my head, like even in a pool, I get nervous because I'm like, I'm not that good a swimmer. So forget about being in cold and choppy waters and trying to like get your mark basically in the ocean to get eaten by a shark. Like that's scary shit.
Yeah.
Terrifying.
Yeah.
What do we think some of the big moments in this movie involving the kids? Like the helicopter scene is utterly ridiculous, yet
amazing.
I love it.
it is kind of a jump the shark moment, but I kind of don't care. Like, I do. The one thing I hate about it is it is kind of like Jaws 2 has become, oh yeah, that's the one where Jaws eats a helicopter. And I kind of hate that it gets reduced to that a lot when people talk about it. But it's still really good. Also, there's that deleted scene where you do see the shark, like, get him underwater. And I wish they would have kept that in, but they were trying to not get the R rating.
Yeah, it needs to be a PG movie. Like, it definitely needs to still be a PG movie.
And they were probably going to, you know, because I feel like Jaws skates by on the skin of its teeth to get the PG.
Oh, yeah.
Or, you know, there's some you know, back room shenanigans going on to get that PG rating for Jaws. So they weren't going to let that happen for Jaws 2. And you can kind of see that because there aren't legs, you know.
No.
There aren't severed heads popping out of boats.
Like that. Right. There's not, you know, Quint, you know, that blood coming out of his mouth, you know, and that sort of thing. But, you know, I imagine the MPAA was like, yeah, not going to happen this time, folks.
Isn't it kind of silly, though? I mean, I'm going to pull in Psycho as a comparison here, because Psycho is an R-rated film.
Which is
so
bullshit.
bizarre. And then you got Jaws as PG.
I know.
Yeah.
I know. I don't.
It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't make any sense.
The MPAA never makes any sense with some of their decision making. Like, it's still, to this day, it's confounding, like, what's going to get. And I think with Jaws, they had to trim a little bit of the leg bouncing. It couldn't bounce on the ocean floor.
But you still see, like, the cut. You see the meat at the end of this severed leg.
I mean,
It's because Norman Bates dressed up like his mom.
Well, the thing is with Psycho, though, they rated it in the 80s as an R-rated film because it never had an MPA rating before that. So, like, even in the 80s, y'all looked at this and y'all said, yep, R.
Rated R.
I think that was on Reputation.
I think so, too.
Honestly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's probably true. At that point, they're like, oh, this is a classic.
Psycho
movie.
was, you know, in the 80s revered as, you know, like the great, you know, horror film of all time.
Yeah.
Right?
And Frenzy is far more violent.
Yeah, absolutely.
Far more sexual.
And that like, actually owns its R rating.
Yeah.
So.
With Frenzy, you would, like, if Hitchcock didn't have the Hays Code to work with all those years, you see, like, this is the kind of movie Hitchcock would have made for years. He would have been and I wonder how his reputation would have been if that. And I love Frenzy. I think Frenzy is really underrated, and it should be discussed as a proto-slasher, very much like Black Christmas should be, but it is awesome.
I've never seen this, and I didn't even know it was an R-rated film, so I'm really excited to check this out.
Definitely check it out. I think you would dig it.
Yeah, it's you know, like I wrote a piece on it for Bloody Disgusting, and I was just so revisiting. I was like, man, this movie really. I mean,
good.
There's some things that kind of like Last House on the Left.
Ooh, oh my! Yeah. Everything you're saying is making me want to watch this more and more.
I mean, it's not as brutal as that. But
Last House is brutal,
but it's great. I thought, too, like, the sequence when everything goes to shit for the kids, like when the boats go out of control, when they start slamming into one another, like, that is a hard thing to pull off and make look coherent, and it works. Like, it is a great sequence of real mayhem.
Well, and there's two, because so when it first happens, you know, you have the one kid, he's like, you know, trying to pump the air in his thing, and it kind of comes out of nowhere, but, you know, you have the build-up as like, we get the POV of the shark again, but I love it again, too, later. I think this is maybe when Marge dies. They're just talking and talking and talking, and all of a sudden, with no build-up, the shark, like, comes up through one of the boat's fabrics.
Yes.
That is a great fucking scare.
Yeah. No, it works. It definitely works. Marge is the one who gets swallowed whole, correct?
Yeah.
It's a great fucking death.
Here's the thing. If I was an actor in one of these movies, because this is on par with the guy in the first movie who's in the pond and you use the shark, like the severed leg guy. I don't want to be in the water with a mechanical shark like this. I would be so even it doesn't look like a real shark, I don't care. I would be terrified. And the fact that in one shot, this is a one single shot thing, this shark comes and you see it gulp her. And then she is gone.
Yeah.
Ugh.
Yeah. It's a great, like, out of nowhere death. It's a great horror movie death. And I think that's, if Jaws is more of an adventure film with a lot of horror elements, or a horror movie that leans towards adventure, I think that Jaws 2 is much more of a straightforward horror movie. And you have just real scary violence in it that I think works really well. Just to see when they're trying to pull Michael over the side of the boat and the shark is coming.
So good.
And it comes along the side of that boat. That is a great, and it took them forever to get that shot. Like, they could not get the timing of it right. And you could see, if you're pulling that dude up and you don't get him, and that thing weighs, I think, about 2 tons.
Right?
Is what they say. It's getting that's going to be like getting hit by a small bus. That's pretty dangerous if you don't get that right. Like, you're in some real danger
and
trying to execute that stunt.
And it looks kind of goofy because when it rubs up against the boat, like, its mouth kind of goes like this. But
right.
But it's such. I'm a sucker for close calls in horror films, and so even though it looks stupid, I'm so amped up from Mike's foot barely missing this shark's mouth. I don't even care.
Sure.
Yeah.
So, and I like the look of the shark in this one. I mean, the shark in Jaws, the first one, is kind of iconic because he's got the big jowls. He's got Nixon jowls.
Yeah.
And it's to hide the big bolts that were holding the jaw on.
Yep.
So they were able to fix that for the second one. So it looks actually a little bit more like a real shark, to be honest. Yeah. And but like you were saying, Rachel, about the burn scar and kind of having a mask, it's almost like Freddy Krueger. In a way. It's a cool sort of, there's no other shark movie where the shark looks like that.
Yeah.
So it's.
I think my favorite shot of it's a small little moment, but when the shark first swims into the bay and you see it from above, you see the body of it swimming, and then you just see the fin pop up, it's stalking its territory of Amity, and nobody else sees it. I think it's one of the best little moments in the movie. It's unnerving. It's going to get worse.
I'm a sucker for those overhead shots. I mean, not to go back to Eddie's death, but there's that overhead shot of the boat as you see the shark go under Tina's boat and go towards him. That, again, I think that's a great shot.
Yeah. All right. I know we're coming up on time, so I want to end with this. One of the big legacies. Actually, before I do that, anything else you guys want to bring up that was important?
No, it doesn't have to be a conversation, but I really hate that the girl who prays to Jesus lives, because honestly, the fact that the shark just swims by her is stupid.
Yeah, I think that would have been great. It's so mean-spirited if she's doing an Our Father and then gets chomped in two. That would have been...
It would have been too mean. But I do
God can't save you, bitch.
I like the realism, though, because, when it grazes her and it cuts her side, because the fact is that sharks... it's not skin. It's
skin.
It's almost like sandpaper, the way they are if it goes against you. So that is an accurate perception of what would happen to you if the shark actually touched you. But I don't buy that this supernatural shark monster just swims by her because she's praying to Jesus.
Right.
That's a good point.
Should have prayed to Satan. Let's see what happens from there. So one of the lasting legacies of Jaws is all the movies it inspires, really all the movies that rip it off. Do you guys have any favorites, any notable imitators of the original, anything that really jumps out?
Well, one of the things I always thought was, okay, so is the dead killer whale a swipe at the ripoffs? Because it's hey, Orca came out, and Dino De Laurentiis's movie, and here, Jaws, our shark, eats it and kills it. I always wondered if that was kind of a swipe at that.
Maybe. That's a good call.
Or I just always read it as because the boat, the orca.
Oh, yeah, that's true, too, yeah.
You thought you were done with this, but it's not.
All of the above.
Yeah.
I've never seen Orca. I will be remitting that very soon, though. I've always heard Tentacles is really fun.
It's a movie.
I'm a sucker for Alligator. I think Alligator is one of the best Jaws
movies. I love Alligator. Yeah, that was the one I was going to mention.
Alligator is so funny.
Oh, man.
I love Joe Dante's Piranha. I think that's a lot of fun.
And Piranha, even the second one, James Cameron directed. That one's
The Spawning.
Yes, that one's fun, too.
I might even argue that Cujo, to some extent, is a Jaws ripoff. Though I really like that movie. And the thing is, calling these movies a ripoff is sort of Yeah, but they're still pretty good.
Wasn't Alien described as Jaws in
Aliens
space?
are ripped.
Yeah.
Well, I think Alien as more of Halloween in space, but yeah, it has been definitely
creature attack movies.
I mean, I'm a sucker for creature features, and here I feel like inherently creature features are looked at as B movies, like they're kind of campy and silly. I actually do appreciate when a creature feature goes like, no, we're serious and this is scary. Like I think Crawl from a couple years ago, which has campy moments, but I think it's a really effective like thrill ride of a film. And
Crawl's
like
really
47,
good. And as you said,
what is it, 47 meters down? Like both of those, I think, are pretty good.
Actually, that's great though, because I think the first one, I know people hate the ending of 47 Meters Down, but I think that movie, I remember watching it and I couldn't breathe because I was so scared by this movie. But then the second one does take a campier approach. The second one's basically a Friday the 13th movie underwater, which I also really love.
I need to watch both of those.
I haven't seen either one. Yeah,
I have a goal this summer of watching like 100 new to me movies. So I'm going to put both of those down and maybe throw them under the basement later.
It's 47. The first one, again, the third act is divisive because something happens that people don't like. I don't mind it. I think it works because there are still some amazing set pieces in it. The second one's dumb as fuck, and it is The Strangers 2 to The Strangers 1. Like that's what those two movies are like.
So, like, the second one's more fun and campy.
You get Sly Stallone's daughter in it.
Yeah. Also, Jamie Foxx's daughter in it.
Some Nepo babies.
Excellent.
Nepo babies.
I need to watch Grizzly because, A, I've heard it's actually decent, but also we actually have a black bear that's been roaming our neighborhood the past couple weeks. Like I have a picture of it. It is outside of our house, like standing in front of our driveway. And I'm like, well, that's fucking freaky that there's a bear running around. But it's a black bear, so allegedly it will more or less stay to itself. And I just don't want it to wander into the busy street.
You guys seen Prophecy?
I have not.
Yes.
Wait, I'm sorry. How is this connected? I'm dying to know.
Oh, I think it's gonna. Don't you think? Yeah, it's
bear.
like a mutant bear.
I've never seen
my
it.
gosh,
Yeah.
it's
John Frankenheimer
amazing.
movie. Yeah, it's
It's
something.
got
It's something. Not to be confused with the Prophecy, the Christopher Walken movies. It's something totally different.
Oh, okay.
I really love how Rachel's like, it's amazing, and Brian's like,
it's got a moment that I was literally like,
I really like that movie. I really like.
Okay, wait. I'm looking at the poster for it. It's very reminiscent of the Broods poster, but I love.
Yes, it is.
So it's literally Prophecy, and right below it says the Monster Movie.
And it is the monster movie.
It's got Talia Shire in it. Speaking of Sly, and
Shit.
It's I recently saw Deep Rising, and
hell
Deep Rising's fun.
Okay.
Yeah.
Honestly, we always talk about how horror was dead in the 90s, right? But if you look at the creature features, like Relic, Anaconda, Deep Blue Sea,
Relic
Deep
rules.
Rising, like so many amazing creature features, and I love all of them. Like Anaconda is one of my favorite movies of all time. I don't care what anyone says.
Brian, I put Arachnophobia on my list of things to watch after your episode on movies.
Oh, really? Yeah.
I don't.
That's
I can't-
a terrific
it's-
movie. It's a
It's
lot
fun,
of fun.
but I can't watch
it. Is.
It's that traumatized me as a kid.
It bothers. Seriously, that movie
I've heard
scares me
so
more
many
than any
people
other
say
movie.
that. So.
But it's also really funny. Like that movie juggles tone masterfully.
Mm-hmm.
Excellent.
Yeah.
So I feel like if Jaws was released now and you had all of these other movies released in its wake, that you would have a studio try to do its own shared universe, like the animals will arise, and it would be like the Avengers of scary animal movies, like something like that would have to happen. All right. I think we can put Jaws 2 to bed. I think that was a really fun discussion on this movie, which is a blast to talk about. And sometimes like these, I hate even saying lesser than, but like some of these movies that aren't super highly regarded end up being the most fun to talk about. But before we go today, let's talk about what we all have coming up. So Trace, tell us what's going on with Horror Queers and what you and Joe have in the works, because you basically, like, this is your job at this point. Like,
it very much is my job. I still have a day job, but one day, the hope is one day I will not have to have a day job. So actually, it's funny. The episode we have coming out this week is going to be on Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho, which is was a big task. Because whenever we talk about like a film like that, I'm like, what can we possibly say about Psycho that hasn't already been said? So I think we try to put our own spin on it. I do want to plug, though, we covered Insidious Chapter 2 a couple weeks ago, and we got really great guests in the Boulet brothers to talk about that film.
Oh, cool.
So I think it turned out really well. And again, that's a movie that came out in 2013 that repurposes the plot of Sleepaway Camp for a modern audience, and it is problematic but also kind of fascinating in that way that I really appreciate.
Excellent. And where can everyone find Horror Queers and find you online? And also, because a lot of your content, your best content, is on Patreon. So can you tell us where, if people find your show and enjoy it, where else can they find it?
Yeah, no. So we are part of Bloody FM, formerly the Bloody Disgusting Podcast Network. So you can find us on Bloody Disgusting. Find the Horror Queers podcast anywhere you get your podcasts, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, whatever the fuck. And then on all socials, we are at Horror Queers. If you want to just follow me, I am at Trace D, as in dog, Thurman. That's my first name, last name with a D in the middle. And yeah, Patreon, please give us money. We love that. It is patreon.com/horrorqueers. Basically, what we do there is we cover new release films there. So, you know, on the main feed, which is free for everyone, we talk about various films through a queer lens, be they explicitly queer or implicitly queer. If they have queer creators on them, we will always cover that. But for the Patreon, we will talk about new films coming out. So, of course, this month we have episodes on Insidious the Red Door, Bird Box Barcelona, and the new movie Cobweb with Lizzie Kaplan that's coming out. So, yeah, it's a fun time. Come to hear us, two gay guys, talk about movies. It's fun.
Excellent. And I love the show. I actually am going to be like signing up for a bunch of patrons by the end of the summer, paying down a couple bills, and then can finally give some people some of my
Well, I do love money, so thank you in advance.
No problem. We all do. Rachel, how about yourself? Do you love money? And also,
I mean, who doesn't, right? Yes.
Rachel, what do you have coming up with Halloweenies and Girls on the Boys and Losers Club and your writing? And
all the things, yes.
Everything else.
Lots of things going on. Losers Club, they just wrapped up Just After Sunset, that short story collection, and some really interesting conversations around that. And then Halloweenies, we're trudging through the Child's Play franchise, and we have a great episode coming up that will be released soon on Seed of Chucky with Bloody Disgusting's Reina Cervantes. So that'll be, love her. So that'll be a fun conversation. And then, and you can find both of those shows on Bloody FM. And then on The Girls on the Boys, me and Jen Adams were just about to wrap up season 1 of the Amazon series The Boys. We just had an episode drop on the penultimate episode of season 1. So if you're a Boys fan, you can check that out. And that's on the Anatomy of a Scream Pod Squad feed. Can find me on Instagram and Threads, I guess, at the Vinyl Girl, GRRRL, and on Twitter at Vinyl Girl.
Brian, what's going on with the Movies for Life pod, and what do you have coming up for your writing right now?
We just released, I guess a couple weeks ago now, our episode on Jaws and arachnophobia, which I think is one of our episodes where I went, yeah, I like this one. This is a really good one. I think was proud of how that one turned out. We've slowed down a little bit on the main episodes during the summer. And I swear we weren't copying Pod and the Pendulum when we decided to do this, but we are doing our Horror of the Year So Far episode is going to be coming out this week. So hear what I thought of everything from Cocaine Bear to Infinity Pool. And then as far as writing goes, I had a piece come out on Bloody Disgusting about one of the great years of Stephen King adaptations, 1983. So I wrote about Cujo, The Dead Zone, and Christine. And that's up there at Bloody Disgusting. And then Manorvellum, my latest, I don't even know what number it is right now off the top of my head, of the series I'm doing on the history of Frankenstein movies came out, and it's all about the Universal sequels, so Bride of Frankenstein through House of Dracula. And it got chosen to be part of Medium's Boost program, which is pretty cool. First time that's happened to me, so excited that happened.
Cool. And we'll be talking I believe, like Frankenstein, Bride of Frankenstein. We'll be doing that, I think, after we wrap up Saw, right? I think we decided that was going to be
I think so.
next.
Yeah, and
you can Frankensteins.
You can count me in for all three of those.
Oh, I know. I know.
Yeah.
Absolutely know that.
Yeah. It's like, because who else is going to come on and talk about them, right? I'm just kidding. I hope other people will, because I think those are great movies. I hope more people come and take a look at too.
Oh, I think so.
Yeah.
That'll be interesting, because it's always fascinating, like what movies do really well, like where we pick up and what really does well for us. But I think Frankenstein is classic enough that should do well. All right, listeners, for us, and I'll move quickly here. For listeners, thank you so much for listening. If you like what you've heard today, please take a moment. And an easy way to support the show, and a free way to support the show, is to rate us, review us, and subscribe to us wherever you're getting your podcast. So we would greatly appreciate that. Helps us find new listeners, and it's also like getting a 5-star review, like only 5 stars, and a few words, like lets us know we're on the right track. We also like money. I'm not going to lie to you. We also like money. Who doesn't? So one great way to support the show is to go to our relaunched Patreon page, patreon.com/pod and the pendulum, where we are putting up bonus episodes. As this episode goes live, Steven and I recorded on film noir classic The Killers from 1946. Later this month, we will have episodes up on Sharknado. We're doing a commentary on that movie where Ariel, Steven, and I are watching it for the first time while drinking and commenting on the movie as it plays. And we will also have our rental shelf out there where we give our recommendations. But starts at a couple bucks. Go to patreon.com/thepod and the pendulum. Follow us on the socials, Twitter @pod and the pendulum. I think I'm going to be handing off the reins to someone to actually promote the show. Even without that, even with like me doing maybe 2 tweets a week under that, thanks to a ton of our old listeners and our new ones, like the show has grown exponentially. It's hitting some numbers I didn't think we were going to hit, and it's a little indie that moves on. Truly appreciate that, and I think in large part it's our co-hosts, because they're fucking awesome to talk movies to. Follow me at Mike_Snoonian at Twitter, and Mike Snoonian, all one word, at Blueski, and at Mike Chump Change on Letterboxd. And yeah, if you like what I have to say, I got to be honest, as I'm getting older, like I just care less and less about social media. Yeah. Just like,
kinda, yeah.
So
the worst is when you don't care about
really
it.
Giving you
Job.
I know.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
So I know I haven't given you the most reason to follow me, but go ahead, follow me anyway. I dare you to. We'll be back. Oh, and also with the show, we'll be covering the Fantasia Film Fest in the coming weeks as well, as I make my way up there. We'll have some coverage of that up here. But we'll be back very shortly. So I think we've hit the 2 high points for this franchise, and it is a pretty
from here.
It's a pretty steep drop off with Jaws 3D. I think I still need to recruit some people for that. And then we have, after that, all the Saw movies. And Ariel has already sent me her notes for the first 3 movies, and they're awesome. So I'm really excited to dive into those movies. But we'll be back before that with another killer shark movie. Thanks, listeners. Have a great